Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto went to the galaxy he never knew existed. Naruto discovers a crashed starship outside his village and his life is forever changed. Under the unorthodox tutelage of a Sith Lord's spirit, he will learn the technology and history of a larger galaxy that he, and no one else from his planet, ever knew existed. Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 11. A person with a bag over his head was dragged down the hall by two ninja in dark cloaks. Both had unique headbands with the symbol of Kirigakure etched into them, and each had a breather mask and one arm that had a gauntlet with clawed fingers. Only their free hands were holding the struggling and tied man, as they might have poisoned him with the claws. Down the hall they dragged the man by his arms until they reached a set of doors. One of the pair let go of the hostage they had kidnapped and opened the doors, while the other dragged the person into the room. The man was placed into a kneeling position and the bag on his head was removed. Tazuna looked around at the dark room he was in. Red satin curtains were covering the windows and he looked to the short man standing in front of him with sunglasses on. The man motioned to the two ninja and said, "Gozu, Meizu, leave us." And both brothers left through the door they had just entered. Despite having his hands tied, Tazuna attempted to stand and attack the man who he had hated for nearly half a decade. However, an unknown force prevented him from standing. They looked at each other, Tazuna glaring and Gato with no readable expression. Something wasn't really sitting right with Tazuna, and it concerned the man before him. Gato was acting differently. He remembered the man with a slightly different voice and not so composed or calm but more arrogant. "I suppose you want to know what you are here for?" inquired Gato. "You're going to kill me," stated Tazuna, and he was rather certain of that fact. "Kill you?" questioned Gato. "Why would I do a thing like that?" "Not when I have a use for you." Gato finished and stepped forward while extending his hand and placing it on Tazuna's head. 5 days later. Naruto sat on the right-hand side of the sandaime while filling out and going over all of the paperwork concerning the missions. It was one of the most boring jobs in the village, but he was there for a reason. The sandaime was in the process of handing out as well as examining new missions that were arriving. Anyone could request a mission, and while some came personally to make the request, many more missions were sent in scrolls. These missions had to be examined, filed by rank and importance, and then would make their way to the Hokage for decisions on whom to send to complete each mission. Not every mission that was sent was given proper consideration. Some were given preference because they came from the fire daimyo or a previous client, while others were not considered at all because of past problems with the client. Although he didn't want to be there, his master had given him instructions on a secondary objective before moving to the new base. Naruto was to wait for a specific prospective client to show up and then do everything in his power to ensure that his master's plan proceeded smoothly and without failure. He had waited the entire morning, took a break for a ramen lunch, and then waited most of the afternoon before the doors to the room opened and the correct man stepped in. Unfortunately for Naruto, that man was holding a bottle of liquor and already seemed rather tipsy. He refrained from having his eye twitch at the possible problems that could come from this dilemma. "So, you'd like to request a C-rank mission, Tazuna-san?" inquired the sandaime as he looked at the forms in front of him that had just been filled out. The handwriting was rather sloppy, so he wanted to be sure he had everything correct. "That's right, an R-rank mission." Tazuna slurred slightly. It was difficult to not think about hurting the man in front of him as Naruto tried to sit calmly. The sandaime was a little amused as it had been a long time since someone had come in to request a mission while being intoxicated. He thought perhaps he should wait until the following day, but perhaps now was the right time as he could ensure that nothing else would happen on the mission, as he had never had a client from Wave Country before. "So, as I understand it, this is just a simple protection mission from bandits and the like, until you get back to Wave Country?" asked the sandaime. "Nope. I mean yes," responded Tazuna while nodding his head. "You also put down that you specifically wanted Hatake Kakashi to take on the mission?" "Who?" Tazuna responded back, and the Sandaime raised an eyebrow at the man. One job. This idiot had one job to do and he's messing it up. Thought Naruto, and he difficulty keeping his anger in check. Deciding to postpone the plan until the subject was back in his right mind again, Naruto spoke up. Perhaps we should wait until Tazuna-san is no longer so impaired so he can properly request a mission. He could be fit in tomorrow morning after he has slept and before he starts drinking again, so that he can properly answer questions. The Sandaime nodded and told Unamo Irika, who was sitting on opposite Naruto on the Sandaime's other side, to fill in Tazuna for the morning. The man was led out of the building to a local hotel to stay the night and sober up. After a few more hours of working, everyone else was dismissed. Naruto left the Hokage Tower knowing he would have to come back in the morning to make sure everything went smoothly, and although he would rather do anything else but that job, he had little choice in the matter. It seems the mind control and specifically the placement of suggestions in the subject has less than desired results when the subject gets inebriated. Naruto noted. It wasn't as if Tazuna had started spilling secrets about Gato or what they were up to. The suggestions were still there, as even while drunk, the man had filled out the correct forms in the correct way and put everything down he was supposed to. In a way it did make sense, as even if the subject was under their control, with an impaired mind they had difficulty acting on the suggestions and orders they had been given. Even when questioned, he did come up with some of the right answers, but they needed to be coaxed out of him. The following morning would likely bring more success. Naruto walked to his apartment and then he would go to the hideout and contact his master to inform him of the setback. They had already set up a method for Naruto to leave the village for an extended period of time without anyone noticing. The extra time was needed to further whatever plans his master had for leaving Wave Country. He wasn't sure exactly what his master had in mind, but would help in any way that he could. Tazuna came in the following morning and answered all of the questions that the Sandaime asked with no problems. The man told the Sandaime that he wanted Hatake Kakashi because someone had told him that the man was the village's best and he wanted the best to protect him. The Sandaime did inquire a little farther, but Tazuna produced satisfactory answers. Naruto waited until right before lunch for Team 7 to show up. They were supposed to be there for a mission several hours earlier but were late. After knocking, Kakashi was allowed to enter the mission room and his genin followed him. They were the only genin that he had ever passed and had been a team for several months. He did wish that the members got along a little better. Sasuke would never open up to his teammates and Sakura was only interested in Sasuke and not in being a ninja. The final member of their team was Shin, who was an interesting boy with a sense of humor. The boy was added at the last minute to the list of graduating genin. He didn't exactly know where Shin had come from, as the boy was added by the village elders from a program that was no longer used, specifically Root. While he had initial concerns, Shin did not act like the emotionless ninja that Root and BU were trained to be. The boy still had emotions and was a good fit for his team. He had yet to find any evidence that the boy was reporting to anyone, but it was likely that the elders chose the boy to be placed on his team to keep tabs on the last Uchiha. His lone eye looked at the Sandaime Irika, and then onto the other person sitting in the room. The boy very much reminded him of his sensei, except for the marks on his face that identified him as the container of the Kyuubi. A small part of him wished that he had at least some role in the boy's life, but he was always busy with ANBU. From what he heard, the boy had accelerated through the academy and would soon take the special Jonin exam. He had also heard that ANBU had an interest in him but were waiting for a little while longer before inviting him. The Uchiha massacre had made most people in the village question how young was too young for advancement. Primarily it was the civilians that questioned it, but some ninja also had concerns. No one was really sure why Itachi had killed his family, but some believed that the boy had been promoted too fast and had not been ready for the work or for missions. It was likely that it was one of the reasons why it had taken so long for Naruto to be allowed to take the special Jonin test and why ANBU was holding off on recruiting him. Looking to the boy, he could see a coldness and uncaring in the blue eyes. The emotionless face betrayed very little and the boy appeared to be studying him just as much as he was studying the boy. Naruto's eyes narrowed with a slight glare, but before Kakashi could figure out why, he was brought out of his thoughts when the Sandaime began speaking. You have been requested for a mission, Kakashi. It's one of the simpler C ranks, so I was wondering if you believed your genin ready to take on a harder mission? Inquired the Sandaime while holding the mission scroll that he had just approved earlier in the morning. Kakashi looked at his group and could read their postures, expressions, and feelings like an open book. Sasuke wanted the higher-ranking mission no matter what it entailed, Shin was excited about leaving the village on a mission, and Sakura felt that Sasuke deserved a higher-ranking mission. I believe they're ready for a C rank, Kakashi said, and the Sandaime smiled and nodded. With a word to the door near the desk, the client entered with another bottle of liquor in hand, but Naruto's thoughts were elsewhere. He was still trying to figure out the very brief feelings from Kakashi when the man looked at him. There was regret and sadness mixed with several other feelings. That was not something that he was used to nor received from more than a handful of people in his lifetime. He couldn't read very much of man's thoughts because the genin that surrounded him were all thinking so many different thoughts and had such strong emotions. By comparison, the emotions from Kakashi were much muted and it was difficult to glean much of anything from the man. It was also possible that Kakashi had a very closed and protected mind like many other people he had encountered in the village, such as the Hokage sitting next to him. Naruto only managed to pick up on emotions from those people and not thoughts. The question remained of, what did the man regret? And he couldn't be sure at that point. Coming back to the situation at hand, the client walked out of the room with Team 7. It was just about break time for lunch, so the Sandaime and Irika started leaving while he continued a little bit of busy work. The plan was going perfectly so far. He just needed to complete the final part of it. Moving to the pile of mission scrolls, he found the one that had just come in the previous day. The mission was rather easy and the client had requested just a single ninja. What Kanoma didn't know, and he did know, was that the mission was requested by his master and was completely fake. Playguys had created the mission to give him an excuse to leave the village to complete their plans. It stated in the scroll that the mission would take almost 2 weeks to complete and he was going to use his current position to secure the mission for himself by placing it on the very bottom of the pile, despite the mission being marked as urgent. When they were done for the day, the mission would be found and someone would have to perform the mission. He would put his own name forward, as by that time, the Sandaime would want to quit for the day and a good number of the available ninja would already have assignments. Naruto would only need to give a mission report when he returned from Wave Country concerning the fake mission and not have to worry about being discovered or having an absence in the village. After informing his master that everything was proceeding as planned, Naruto left early the next morning on his mission. Playguys in turn gave him additional instructions to be completed before arriving in Wave. As he walked down the path towards the coast of Fire Country, he kept what senses he had open for the individuals he was looking for and also thought about what his master might be planning and what he knew or could guess about it. It was apparently training and skills that he would need and he was to use the force to help him discover what his master might be up to. He already knew what they wanted with Hatake Kakashi, but he didn't know what Playguys wanted with the 2 individuals he was going to pick up. He also didn't know what his master needed with the Sith text that he was carrying with him in a scroll and that he had retrieved from the hideout. What's in those texts that he would need? Was the main question that was going through his head. He knew the texts contained information on several topics such as Sith alchemy, Sith spawn, the creation of weapons, and a few other minor topics. The only answer that he could come up with was that his master wanted to use the texts to create a Sith spawn. Playguys would be traveling to a new location and no one could be trusted there at this point. His master would need some kind of protection because Zabuza had not wanted to extend his contract and Playguys wasn't sure he could control the man with his limited powers. That meant that someone else would have to protect his master during the time before he traveled to Snow Country, which would likely be a couple of months. Gato had practically owned Wave Country and had numerous bandits, thugs, to order around, so it wasn't a problem, but Snow Country was owned by someone else and they had nothing there. It made sense to make sure that his master was protected from a double cross while in a new location. Gata's samurai were of no help and if Zabuza didn't want to continue employment, then that left the two individuals that he was currently going after and could feel just in the range of life sensibility. Gozu and Meizu were submerged in a puddle on the road from Konoha to the Fire Country coast. No matter what help Tazuna was able to acquire, they would still have the element of surprise. With a civilian client with them, whoever Konoha sent would have to travel down that dirt road, and they had arrived earlier in the morning to wait because they couldn't be sure when Tazuna and the ninja would pass by. They had been waiting over an hour before they could finally hear someone coming down the road. Unfortunately, it only sounded like a single person, and unless Tazuna was unable to get ninja, it was likely that this wasn't the person they were waiting for. "You can come out, Gozu and Meizu, I know you're there," stated Naruto to the puddle while standing a good distance away. The puddle didn't move, but he could feel the confusion and alarm from the brothers within. In a burst of speed, both quickly jumped out of the puddle and stood across from him as the puddle quickly evaporated. They both looked at the cloaked figure and did recognize the description from what Zabuza and Haku had said. It was likely that this person also worked for Gato, but they didn't let their guard down. From what Zabuza had said, the boy had fought and nearly defeated him, so it was unlikely that they could face him by themselves. "I'm guessing that Zabuza sent both of you to take care of Tazuna?" Naruto stated rhetorically. He didn't receive a response, only surprise, but continued, "Plans change, however. Tazuna has managed to get Hatake Kakashi to protect him. Neither of you will be able to beat him, but he'll likely be here in a half an hour, so you're welcome to try." Both brothers glanced at each other about the information and then looked back at him. He could tell that they were worried and continued, "Zabuza does not wish to continue his contract with my master, however, there are positions for you both, if you want them." Again, they looked at each and both nodded in agreement. They wanted to know more, and Naruto knew that the situation was going to work in his favor. "What's the offer?" stated one of the demon brothers, and they both eagerly awaited the response. "My master is willing to offer both money and power in exchange for your services. You can either take the deal or wait here for Hatake-san and continue with your mission," stated Naruto, and he could feel the brothers thinking it over. If they were smart, they would realize that they couldn't take on a Jonin of Kakashi's level, but if they didn't, he would just have to persuade them. "What kind of power?" the other brother asked. Naruto smirked slightly, "Something you can't get anywhere else, and that would give both of you a great advantage over anyone you faced," he said, and although he didn't know what exactly his master had in mind, he knew enough to make the offer enticing. The demon brothers nodded and they followed Naruto back to Wave Country. About half an hour later, Team 7 and their new client walked down the very street that they had just talked on and continued on to Wave Country. A day later. "Your ninja duo failed Zabuza," stated Gato with little emotion as Playguys lied to the man. Zabuza and his apprentice had been moved into a nearby treehouse that had been constructed. Playguys had done it mostly to try and keep Zabuza out of his affairs, as the former member of the Seven Swordsmen was getting too curious about what he was doing. "It isn't a big deal. I'll just go myself and take care of it. Whoever it was who defeated the demon brothers won't last long against me," stated Zabuza from his seat across from the standing Gato. "Well, seeing as you're going to personally take care of it, I want you to capture the ninja that Tazuna hired to protect him," stated Gato, and Zabuza raised a non-existent eyebrow. What would he want with captured ninja? He thought, but Gato gave nothing away and his true plans or intentions were still not known to him. "Fine, but it will cost extra," demanded Zabuza, as he wanted to see how much the little man wanted whoever Tazuna had hired. "Just make sure it gets done this time," stated Gato, and he left with his two samurai. Zabuza and the masked Haku watched him leave, and neither could figure out what the man's real intentions were. Despite working for the short billionaire for several months, they were no closer in determining what his real goals were. It wasn't really his business to spy on his client, but he wanted to know, especially about the cloaked boy. Haku had told him her observations on the weapon that the boy had made, which was a shuriken that he used right after creating it and to great effect. The two people spying on the boy also intrigued him, and now Gato wanted him to capture several ninja from Konoha. No matter how much he thought about it, none of the plans really made sense.
Was Gata trying to take hostages for a ransom or to put forth demands or perhaps get some information?
If so, he was glad to be leaving the short man's service as he didn't want to get involved with a hidden village or any hostage nonsense that Gata may be planning. It shouldn't be that difficult to capture a team of Konoha ninja and then he would make sure to leave before anything else happened.
Naruto walked through the double doors and into his master's study followed by the demon brothers.
He stood in front of the desk and then knelt on one leg.
"I have done as you have asked, master."
The chair turned to reveal Gatu, but the glasses were off, revealing his sulfuric yellow eyes and darkened skin around the eyes. Both brothers stared as they had never seen Gatu without his glasses, and by what they could feel coming from the short man, it made sense why the boy would call him master. It wasn't power radiating from the businessman but a dark presence that filled the room and sent chills up their spine.
"Good.
We should head to the warehouse where the ceremony shall take place," stated Plagueyes, and he got up from the chair and walked towards his student.
Naruto didn't move but wanted to ask the question that had been on his mind. "Master, just what from the information in the texts do you intend to use on these two?"
Plagueyes stopped walking and small smirk tugged on his lips. "I was thinking one of the more interesting rituals that I have yet to try and is rather fitting with the title they go by.
It will take some preparation but I think that the results will be more than adequate," stated Plagueyes. "Does it matter that they do not possess the force?" inquired Naruto through telepathy, as it was something that had occurred to him as he traveled the distance from Konoha to Wave. Neither brother had any midichlorians, so he wondered if any process from the texts would work.
Plagueyes responded, "I'm not really that sure, but the creation of a Sith spawn does not necessarily require it, as we will merely be altering their bodies with the dark side of the Force. It's possible that their chakra could be used instead to provide the abilities granted by the ritual, but we shall see."
Naruto nodded and stood while following his master to the doorway and out to the docks.
He could feel the fear and uneasiness come from the demon brothers, but he followed his master's orders.
If the process worked, then neither brother would be complaining about the outcome.
Plagueyes couldn't use any ninja abilities, so they would have to take a boat to the isolated warehouse that had been constructed and was where Naruto had created his disc blades.
Nothing out of the ordinary had happened since they left Konoha.
Looking over to his students, Kakashi could actually see them getting more and more bored as time went on. No bandits, no unnecessary stops, no delays, and not a single problem, yet he still felt that there was something amiss.
His skills and instincts had been honed during the Third Ninja War and in ANBU after that, and he could tell that the client was hiding something from them. What exactly that information was, he couldn't determine. He had thought about asking the man or perhaps hinting at something, but they weren't supposed to interrogate the client, and he thought by the way Tazuna was so nervous when they first started out, that something would have happened already. This was their second day traveling and they were nearly at the shore. It would take at least a couple of hours to reach the coast of Fire Country and a little more time to cross the ocean to Wave. Tazuna said that he knew someone that could take them across the gap between the countries and that they wouldn't have to pay to get across. The mission was turning out to be a very simple C rank, and while that wasn't a bad thing, he had hoped that it would give him a chance to test his genin. At least a few bandits crossing their paths or perhaps a surprise attack by bandits wouldn't be a bad thing and would give him a chance to gauge his students. Often genin would freeze during their first real conflict, and it was best to get that over with under the best conditions possible. At this rate though, he still wasn't sure if this mission would provide what he was looking for. They hadn't taken a very fast boat, so it took a little while to reach the warehouse on the farthest point of Wave Country. The brothers were very curious about what would happen, but their desire for power and money outweighed any of their concerns. Traveling with Zabuza had not been very productive for them, and this new opportunity was too good to pass up. If Zabuza didn't want to continue working for good pay under one of the richest men on the planet, then why should they continue working under him? The boat pulled up the small dock next to the yacht that had been docked there for some time. All occupants of the boat got out and walked into the empty warehouse. The furnace had been sealed into a storage scroll and packed onto the boat, so there were only a few leftover tables and empty crates in the warehouse.
The brothers were getting a little worried as there wasn't anything there, but Naruto stepped forward and started performing what his master had telepathically commanded him to do. Naruto started by unsealing all of the needed supplies from his scrolls. Playguys walked over and opened the book to the correct page. Naruto glanced over and read the ancient Sith language to find out that his master planned to turn both brothers into smoke demons. Playguys read through the text again and told the brothers to get comfortable as it would take a while to set up. He then ordered Naruto to create several shadow clones and had them start creating the Sith runes on the concrete floor of the warehouse that would be required for the ritual. The clones channeled lightning chakra into kunai as it was the most efficient tool and chakra nature to work with and would carve the concrete the best. The correct symbols were slowly carved out, creating one large circle and three smaller ones. The real Naruto went to the text and began memorizing everything that needed to be said. One of the circles was for Naruto to stand in and the other two were for the demon brothers. Once the symbols were complete, everyone sat in the correct circles and the process was started. The ritual began with Naruto chanting in the ancient Sith language for several minutes while the demon brothers waited. He then began channeling the force into the runes around them. The etched runes, which were originally the same color as the concrete, started to blacken and then glow red hot. Smoke started to emanate from the runes, with more coming from the ones around the demon brothers. The smoke began as gray and then changed to purple and slowly darkened. The purplish-black smoke began to gather into two small orbs, one over each of the brothers. Both looked up at the strange phenomenon and started to think they should get out of here. They didn't know what was going to happen, but this was not something that they expected. It seemed like Gato and the boy were using some kind of kenjutsu on them. Despite wanting to get away from the smoldering symbols and the gathering smoke, both found themselves rooted to the spot. Naruto continued to chant with his eyes closed as Playguys watched the ritual from outside the circle of runes. A good amount of time passed as the ritual was slowly completed by his student. This was the first time in probably hundreds of years that the ritual was being used, and he was immensely curious of the results. It was possible that the ritual would fail as he had no idea what effects would occur when the individuals it was used on didn't have the force and had chakra instead. It could completely fail, it could create something completely abnormal from the smoke demon it was supposed to create, or it could create something better. He watched intently as his student completed the chanting and then unsealed his ninjato. Taking the weapon, Naruto touched the blade to his palm to draw out some blood for the ritual. That will bind them to him as his servants. Playguys thought, and he knew that he would rather have the new Sith spawn as his own servants, rather than his students, but he only had a temporary body with none of his own blood and his spirit was not strong enough to complete the ritual. Instead of the blood dripping to the ground from Naruto's palm, it did the reverse and dripped upward from the wound. The blood split up in the air and equal drops went into the two separate orbs of smoke. Once the blood touched the smoke, each orb rippled and when the last of the blood that had floated to the orbs entered, both orbs burst apart, releasing the smoke within. It looked as if the smoke would start spreading across the area like a smoke bomb, but it suddenly stopped expanding and all moved in one direction. The smoke plumes poured into the respective demon brother that it belonged to. It went in through their eyes, breathing mask, and ears while both brothers screamed in agony as their bodies were invaded by the dark purple smoke. Naruto opened his eyes and watched the transformation occur before him. The exposed skin of the demon brothers, which wasn't very much to begin with, started to blacken, followed by their clothes. The process was completed when both brothers were completely blackened and they both went silent. The color changed to the same dark purple as the smoke and both student and master watched with anticipation. After a brief period of time, the unmoving brothers stirred and their eyes opened to reveal a glowing red instead of a scarab or iris. Naruto readied himself just in case the process hadn't worked and he needed to kill them, but they made no move. Instead, the dark purple color faded away to reveal the demon brothers how they were originally. Their eyes even went back to normal, thinking that he had messed something up. Naruto got up and went to the text. Both brothers came back from a daze moments later and looked around. "How much longer is this going to take?" asked Gozu, and his brother crossed his arms in boredom and annoyance. Naruto stopped looking through the text and turned to them.
they can't remember anything of what just happened.
They can also talk, which is not something that the text said was possible with smoke demons.
Did the process completely fail and nothing changed at all? He speculated. Plagueyes walked over the demon brothers to better examine them and said, "The process is already over. What is the last thing you remember?"
Both brothers looked at each other surprised and turned back. "The seals were placed, we sat down and then you got back up again,"
stated Meizu, and his brother nodded in agreement. Naruto walked over to the two and wondered what was going on.
If something had happened to them, then the results were not obvious and it appeared as though nothing had happened at all. Pulling out one of his kunai, Naruto tossed it to the closest brother, which was Gozu, and said, "Cut your hand with the kunai." Gozu stared at him but obeyed and palmed the kunai into his clawed hand and cut a small area on his other palm. Meizu, Naruto, and Plagueyes all watched as the cut produced a small amount of dark purple smoke and no blood. The wound was sealed shut by the smoke a moment later with no evidence of a wound.
Everyone stared at the hand and Gozu said, "It didn't even hurt." And then he impaled his hand with the kunai.
Holding up the impaled hand, he just stared at it, like everyone else did.
It didn't hurt him at all, yet most of the kunai blade was sticking out the back of his hand.
Removing the object, purple smoke again came out and the hole from the kunai was reformed by the smoke. The hole was sealed, which left a dark purple area of skin for a brief moment before it turned back into the same skin tone as the rest of his hand.
Turning to his brother, Gozu threw kunai at Meizu.
It struck Meizu in the shoulder and passed through the shoulder with ease to continue on until it embedded itself into the wall of the warehouse. The wound on Meizu was reformed by the smoke that the edges of the wound turned into, and in mere moments, his body had reformed into its original shape and showed no evidence of any damage.
"You had no idea that would work, did you?" questioned Meizu with rage and punched his brother in the face, which sent Gozu flying farther than any of the others thought the punch would. Gozu hit the ground and skidded but got up right afterward. He rubbed his breathing mask that was smoking and reforming to its original shape, but seemed perfectly fine. "Your punch didn't even hurt," he stated with some surprise. "It seems the process was definitely a success after all," stated Plagueyes, and everyone turned to him.
"I have some business to attend to back at my mansion, so I'll be taking the boat." And then he looked to Naruto and said specifically to him, "Stay here and determine what the process has caused and the limits of the new abilities of the Smoke Demon Brothers. I need to know what they can or cannot do, and after that there is something else that needs to be prepared. Come to see me about it after you're done." And with that, Plagueyes left the warehouse. Naruto was left watching his master leave while the demon brothers punched each other stupid and wondered what was so important that his master had to get back to before leaving for Snow Country. The crossing to Wave Country had been very quiet, but it wasn't because there was nothing to talk about. The man steering the boat had told them to be quiet, otherwise they would get caught, and Kakashi was getting an idea about what the mission was really about. "Tazuna must have hired us not to protect him from bandits but to get rid of bandits in Wave Country," were Kakashi's thoughts on the new developments, and it made sense to him. Tazuna was worried the whole way back to Wave, and it must be that the bandits had either taken control of Wave or were terrorizing it, and rather than pay to get rid of the bandits, Tazuna had paid for a cheaper protection mission until he got back home. It was likely that they would get attacked before they completed the mission and would be forced to protect Tazuna from whatever bandits the village was being troubled by. It was an interesting plan to lower the payment of a mission by not giving out the actual details, forcing them to complete the normally higher paying mission in order to complete their assigned mission. Tazuna was likely leading them to, or at least where they would be attacked or come across bandits. Perhaps he was even taking them directly to the bandits' camp. They would have to fight the bandits as part of their mission to protect the client. The other possibility was that they were being led into an ambush by Tazuna, and he put his book away and paid full attention to his surroundings. He didn't like being lied to and would be having a long discussion with Tazuna after this was over. Plagueyes arrived back at his mansion sometime later. He was curious to see what new abilities the brothers possessed, but he had other things to take care of as well.
Zabuza was likely facing off against the Konoha ninja, and then he would have to look through the copy nin's mind to determine if his guess was correct.
Several years previously, he had gone through the minds of school teachers in order to get them to skip his student ahead a grade. While putting the mind control and suggestions in place, he had also taken a brief look through the knowledge of the Chunin teachers he was temporarily subjugating. During one of those looks, he had stumbled across the information that Hatake Kakashi was the student of the Yondaime Hokage. He had put the information away for future reference, and now that information was useful to him. The problem with the Konoha Jonin was that he believed that the man knew about the Yondaime being Naruto's father. Years ago, he had meditated on the prospect of what to do with the information concerning Naruto's parents, and the answer he had come up with was that the knowledge was too damaging for Naruto and he could not gauge what the boy's response would be. His plans were in the fledgling stages at that time, and it was better to keep the information to himself. If anything ever destroyed the trust between master and student, or if Naruto decided at some point that he no longer wanted what Plagueyes was offering, he had something left to get the boy back on his side and away from the village. That had never happened though. Naruto had never shown any intention of betraying him or not going along with training and numerous tests that he had imposed. Therefore, the information was never useful to him. Now however, that information changed from being a precaution to a liability. It was obvious that once Naruto got back, he would use drain knowledge on the captured Hatake. It was also obvious that his student might discover that information if Kakashi even knew it. The part that wasn't obvious to him was that if that information was there, what would his student do when he learned it? Guessing what Naruto would do next was never easy. The boy's mind seemed to work differently than his own mind. At the time when he originally discovered this information, he wasn't about to see his plans destroyed because of his new student plotting revenge. Now was no different, and perhaps an even worse time to tell Naruto about his parents. The boy would react negatively to the news, that was a given. The news could send Naruto over the edge and cause him to completely embrace the dark side of the Force, which was not something that his student had done yet. Naruto could use the dark side of the Force to great effect, but he had yet to take the plunge completely over to the dark side. In that state, Naruto might attack anyone that he felt kept the information from him, including his own master, especially if the boy discovered that he had known the truth for years. The furious Naruto may also access the Kyuubi's chakra, and Plagueyes was still unsure what effects or problems it could cause. It was a problem with no real solution that could destroy all that had been accomplished up until that point. Naruto could always lash out at Konoha, which would ruin their plans, as the boy might be captured or even killed if he started attacking those that might know the secret and had kept it from him, like the Hokage. It was a difficult line to walk, and he could tell that Naruto was already getting suspicious of his actions. However, there is nothing that can be done about that. He thought, and he knew that there was no good way to give Naruto the information that he was keeping from him. If there was, he would already have given it to Naruto, as the boy had been nothing but loyal. As long as it doesn't ruin our plans for getting back to the galaxy, I could care less if he came back and bombarded the village from orbit. He thought, because as long as Naruto got all of the information that they wanted from the village, it served no more use to them. Now came the waiting game, and he wondered how Zabuza was faring against the copy ninja. Looking through the slightly refracted image of his team through the water, Kakashi watched horrified as all three of his genin, and the client, were hit with sunburn from someone in the bushes. Of all of his failures, this was the worst, and he was helpless to do anything as he watched the genin fall to the ground. He had no idea that Tazuna was running from missing nin, especially someone with a reputation and ranking like Zabuza. There was no way for him to know about the missing nin, but he blamed himself anyway. It was his fault for not questioning the client any further about his suspicions. He was running out of air, but he didn't notice. His mind was just concentrating on the thoughts of how he had let his team down. The technique Zabuza was using ended, but before Kakashi could do anything, he was knocked out with several sunburn as well. The Kiri swordsman created several water clones to carry the people that he had captured to the specified warehouse. He had no idea what Gato wanted with them, but it didn't really matter, as that was what the client wanted, and that was what he would do. The warehouse had apparently been prepared beforehand with an area that had cages set up, and Gato had acquired chakra seals that Zabuza placed on the captives. Walking out of the warehouse after depositing the captured individuals, he thought over the situation in his mind. Nothing about it really made sense, and he couldn't figure out what Gato wanted with captive Konoha ninja. In any case, he'd have Haku watch the warehouse and see what happened while he informed Gato that he had successfully captured the group. Walking as briskly as the short stubby legs would take him, Plagueyes entered the warehouse with the captured ninja. He only had a short period in which to work until his student got back from working with the Demon Brothers. Setting the small case he brought with him down on a nearby crate, he pulled out the medical supplies that he would need to get the sample from Kakashi's left eye. Pulling out the syringe, he removed the forehead protector and pulled open the eyelid. Using the small needle, he took enough of a tissue sample to recreate the eye later, and he put the forehead protector back the way he found it. Storing the sample in the case he brought, Plagueyes then went about the process of examining Kakashi's memories. He needed to find out what the man knew. It was possible that Kakashi knew nothing about Naruto being the Yandame's son, or that it was buried rather deeply, and that if Naruto went through the man's memories for jutsu and techniques, he would never find it. Unfortunately, he found exactly what he surmised would be there. Kakashi knew everything, and the information was not buried very deeply, so his student would likely find it if he used drain knowledge on the man. Plagueyes took all of the other information that they would be interested in and left the caged area of the warehouse to think. Of the 4 people in the cages, he only needed one to live in the worst-case scenario, and that was the boy from Root and who reported to Danzo. The rest weren't needed to fulfill that task. However, the fewer people that were killed, the less of an investigation there would be by other Konoha ninja to find out how the last Uchiha or one of the best Jonin in the village were killed on a simple C-ranked mission. The situation presented a difficult problem. If done the right way, however, he might be able to take care of another problem. Since the 2 Root members were sent back to Konoha under his mind control. One team had been sent back to Wave on a fact-finding mission to determine who lived in the mansion and owned the warehouse that Naruto had been in. Danzo knew about the meeting in the mansion, the warehouse, and the construction of something in the warehouse from earlier messages that they could not stop because they didn't know someone was following Naruto at that point in time. The second mission could not be stopped without raising further suspicion, so Danzo now knew that Naruto had talked with Gato of Gato Shipping and was doing something in one of the tycoon's warehouses. Beyond that, there was only what Danzo could piece together by himself with bits and pieces of the knowledge available or by guesswork. Plagueyes half expected Danzo to send someone to question, interrogate, or perhaps even kidnap him, but that hadn't happened, which meant that Danzo must not have very much information or was a very cautious person. However, it was only a matter of time before Danzo got curious enough to get more information, and so Plagueyes had come up with an idea. In order to keep their plans in Konoha and to stop Danzo from getting more information, Gato had to die. He would very much have liked to take a new host, but the current one was too important as he needed it for the negotiations in Snow Country. With the death of Gato being known to Konoha, especially Danzo, no further information could be determined about Naruto without going directly to the source. From what he knew of Danzo, the man wouldn't make such a bold move or make any such actions while the Sandaime was Hokage. This meant that Naruto would be free to continue with their plans in Konoha and would give them a chance to test a Kenjutsu from the Scroll of Seals. The only problem now was what he should do about Kakashi. Tazuna and the others were not a big deal as they could either be killed or just left alive and would not hinder his plans. Kakashi, on the other hand, could hinder his plans. He could kill the man right at that very moment, but then Naruto would become more suspicious of his actions. His original plans were to let the ninja go after getting the information so he could have an audience of witnesses from Konoha for his death, but would that still be the best decision to make? Unfortunately, he didn't have time to meditate, so he had to choose from the options he could come up with on the spot. He quickly determined that killing Kakashi was out as the man would make for a better witness and the act would make his student more suspicious. The information in Kakashi's head could be blocked, or at least a mental block could be placed in the man's mind to stop Naruto from going too deep and finding the truth. He could also transfer the knowledge that he had already taken from Kakashi directly to his student, which was not always a good option to learn something because inputting knowledge directly into someone's head in that manner had the potential to cause brain damage and other problems. Despite the risks, the second option seemed best as Naruto might discover the mental barrier that he placed and try to break it. The technique involved taking specific knowledge and implanting it into another person's mind. The knowledge could not be memories as they were far more difficult to implant or alter and usually resulted in destroying a person's mind. Using this method, he could send certain knowledge taken from Kakashi to his student and make sure that Kakashi and the rest of the individuals in the cell escaped for his other plans. The force technique was difficult to perform and could only transfer direct knowledge of a subject, in this case jutsu from Kakashi, into Naruto's mind. Coming to the decision, Gata made sure that the Jonin would be able to get himself free from captivity before leaving the warehouse and heading back to the mansion. It was important that Kakashi escape rather soon and before Naruto came back. This would set the stage for the next confrontation between Kakashi and Zabuza where he could betray his hired missing man and make sure to have a convincing death so he could escape to Snow Country without Danzo or anyone else knowing he was still alive. From one of the windows on the warehouse, Haku watched as the client made sure that the ninja could escape and then left the warehouse. She had seen Gata take the sample from the Konoha Joninsai and also do something very strange to the man, which involved just placing his hand on the Jonin's head. She needed to get back to report to Zabuza about the strange behavior and the sabotaging that Gata did to ensure the Konoha ninja escaped. Naruto returned to mansion along with the demon's brothers, but only he went to see Plagueyes and report on his findings concerning the success of the ritual. He didn't need to knock as Plagueyes gave him a mental enter and he walked through the double doors of the study. Plagueyes looked up from his papers and told Naruto to sit down in one of the chairs in front of his desk. Sitting down, Naruto began his report. Master, it seems the ritual was a success but with a few added side effects and difference from what the results are supposed to be. Plagueyes responded with intrigue. What sort of differences and side effects? Side effects. It seems that they do not have to stay in smoke form like the text says. The color is also different from the standard red and is, as we both saw, a dark purple smoke. They appear to have the ability to switch into a smoke form and change between looking normal and looking completely dark purple. They can change into a plume of smoke and move around a room, while also reforming at will. They can still both use chakra just as well as they could before the ritual. It seems that the clothing that they wear and accessories are also made of smoke and they can add or remove items and those items will go with them. So they still have ninja tools in their pouches and when they form into smoke, the items somehow go with them without hindering their smoke abilities and when they become solid again, they can reach into their ninja pouches and remove the tools. Likely they can get into anything that isn't airtight by turning into smoke and traveling into it. They can turn completely to a plume of smoke and travel around at similar speeds to what they normally could when not in smoke form. They are immune to physical attacks and most weapons, but I did find limits to their abilities. No regular weapon can harm them, but one that is imbued with the force can hurt them. Force abilities can also affect them, but only to a degree. I used force grip on them, but they turned into smoke and slipped through my grasp. I believe ninjutsu will also affect them to some degree, but I really can't be sure without resorting to the chance of possibly hurting or killing them to find out. They do appear to be rather susceptible to water jutsu and were unable to form into smoke while inside of the hidden mist jutsu. Beyond that, I wasn't able to test any farther. They still have the ability to speak, which the text stated would be taken away from them. I also don't know whether they can consume the body of another person as it is written, but I do know that they are under my control. Stated Naruto as he concluded his report. Plagueyes took in everything that was said and was curious to test and see the abilities that Naruto described. There was one thing he did want to clarify. How do you know that they are under your control? I made them use their metal chain as a jump rope. They just did it without complaining or questioning me. I watched them both jump that shuriken chain over and over for several minutes. Replied Naruto, and Plagueyes could feel the amusement coming from the boy. Moving on to other subjects, Plagueyes put together his thoughts to inform his student about the Konoha ninja without raising too much suspicion. Zabuza was able to successfully capture the Konoha ninja, but I'm afraid they have likely already woken up and escaped, which was my plan from the beginning. stated Plagueyes, and added the last part when he felt Naruto was about to question why he would let them escape.
What about the information I was supposed to get from Kakashi? Stated Naruto, and Plagueyes replied, I was able to use drain knowledge on the man right after he was brought in by Zabuza. I can give you all of the information that I took from him. I thought perhaps you might take a while with the Demon Brothers and that I should ensure that the information was acquired. As for your concerns over why I let him go, it involves my plans for leaving Wave Country. Stated Plagueyes, and he put in a short pause before continuing, because of the meddling of Danzo, a connection between us has been discovered, not between you and me but between you and Gato. I still need Gato in order to further our plans in Snow Country, but I also need to get rid of him, or at least make Danzo believe he is gone. Naruto could guess where this was going and asked, is this why you had me memorize that Kenjutsu and the Scroll of Seals?
Plagueyes merely nodded his affirmation and said, I already have the person picked out, but we need to control the situation. At some point I have to inform Zabuza that the Konoha ninja have escaped and that something will need to be done about them. I also don't know how well the Kenjutsu will work. It hints at not keeping the disguise active after the technique has ended and the body dead, so we need to be sure before planning to use it later on in the Chunin exams. Escaping from the warehouse wasn't very difficult. The guards put in charge of watching them were rather inept, and he was able to get out of the bindings that held him to free his genin and the client. He was relieved to find that his genin were all alive and were just put into a false death state. None of them were in any shape to fight, but they had managed to get back to Tezuna's home, only to demand answers from the man about what was going on. They found out about the problems in Wave caused by Gato, but Kakashi was still confused as to why they had been captured and not killed. Momochi Zabuza was not known for taking prisoners or leaving people alive at all. The best explanation that he could come up with was that Gato didn't want to kill any Konoha ninja and possibly bring the rest of the village down on him, but that didn't make much sense as it didn't explain what Gato would have done with them. Why capture when it was easier and made more sense to just kill them? Tezuna didn't have any answers for them on that subject and was just thankful to be alive. Kakashi informed him about how the mission would be increasing in rank and the fact that they should have just dropped the mission because they had been lied to and it was likely more than genin could handle. However, they had no place to go for the meantime. Being put into a death-like state with Sunbon took a few days to completely recover from. Zabuza, on the other hand, was not injured or hindered in any way and could come after them again at any point in time. The question that none of them knew was when he would show up again. Based on what Haku had told him and what Gato himself had just come to tell him, Zabuza was thoroughly confused. Nothing about what was going on made any sense, no matter how he looked at it. Gato was trying to take over the country, at least what he originally thought, but now he was no longer sure. Why let the Konoha ninja go? He thought, and it really pissed him off. Everything Gato seemed to be doing was contrary to what he thought the man should be doing or what he thought the businessman would do. There were so many secrets and different agendas going on with the short man that it was difficult to tell what he was really up to. What did Gato really want with Wave Country? What was the man planning with the Konoha ninja? He couldn't help but feel that he was a disposable pawn or was being used for something much bigger. Gato had told him to be prepared to attack the Konoha ninja and the bridge builder again in a few days' time, and it made him wonder why they should wait. He thought about just asking Gato what was going on. Marching right into the man's study and demanding answers, but he also disliked the thought. He had made a contract, and until the man showed signs of actually breaking that contract or double-crossing him, he would not act and would wait to see what unfolded. He was getting paid quite a bit of money to just sit and wait around, and he needed that money to complete his ambitions. 2 days later. Standing at the head of a small boat heading towards the unfinished bridge, Plagueyes flexed his hand and marveled at how much control he had using the Kenjutsu. Naruto had performed the jutsu on one of his samurai and supplied the chakra to hold the jutsu up to make things as convincing as possible. The samurai's body was being controlled by him from quite a distance, and no one could tell that it wasn't really Gata's body. His death would need to convince the Konoha ninja and the people of Wave, but he knew that Zabuza was getting more and more suspicious of what he was up to.
Zabuza wasn't stupid, and it was possible that he would continue looking for answers even after Gato was dead by his own hands. This had already been taken care of, and they would be able to convince even Zabuza that he was dead. As they neared the bridge, he could see a dense fog covering a portion of the bridge near the uncompleted end. The boat pulled up alongside the end of the bridge, and he could see the real Naruto sticking to the side of one of the pillars and waiting for him. Just in case things didn't go the way they had planned, his student was to finish the job and then return to Konoha to complete the rest of their plans. Climbing up the ladder with the rest of the bandits that he hired, he got in position and had Naruto use the force to disperse some of the fog and get the attention of his executioner. The sound of a metal clang filled the still mist once again as Zabuza and Kakashi fought a very sedate battle. In the beginning of the fight, Kakashi wasn't sure why they weren't fighting all out, and he first thought it was to lure him into a false sense of security or to get him to let his guard down, but none of those things happened as the battle progressed. He noted that it was as if Zabuza was not trying to wear himself out in fighting with no real intent to finish the battle, only to prolong it. Did Zabuza know something he didn't? The more the fight progressed, the more he believed that something else was really going on. He had tried to get to his students that were fighting the masked hunter Nin, but he wasn't able to get near the ice dome. What worried Kakashi was that the only time ninja would fight in this manner was likely when they were buying time for reinforcements to arrive, but he knew that Zabuza could fight on his level, so why would the Kiri ninja even need reinforcements, and where would he get them from? He was sure that the hunter Nin could likely hold off or perhaps even defeat his genin and even fight himself near equal footing. Whatever Zabuza had been waiting for finally arrived when the mist started to be pushed back and revealed a large contingent of bandits with what Kakashi assumed was Gato at the lead. The fighting stopped for a second as everyone on the bridge stared at the bandits and Gato. Haku's ice mirrors melted and she took her place by Gato's side. Kakashi looked back between the new arrivals and Zabuza and could see the tension between the two. So these aren't reinforcements, Zabuza is being double-crossed by Gato and he suspected it. He thought and went to see about his genin while not letting his guard down. So, you never intended to pay me, stated Zabuza as he hefted his zanbato and prepared to attack. Gato smiled and chuckled at the ninja in front of him. I asked you to renew the contract, but you refused. It's better to kill you now than worry about you telling anyone about me. This all could have been avoided. And he paused before stating, the person who brings me the demon's head will get paid double. As both Zabuza and the bandits charged forward, Gato walked in the opposite direction to the end of the bridge. The short man seemed confident of his victory, despite the screams coming from the group of bandits behind him. Cutting his way through the bandits, Zabuza broke through the last of them and charged. Gato looked back and his yellow eyes widened as he let out a cry for help and started running the last distance to the ladder and boat. As Zabuza closed, he readied his zanbato to take the businessman's head clean off. Reaching the end of the dock, Plagueeyes turned around and felt the body freeze at the sight of the charging Zabuza. The man had a visible aura around him of some kind of blue demon and he tried to determine what kind of ability it was. No one double-crosses me and lives, stated Zabuza as his sword cleaved off the head of Gato when the head went off the end of the bridge, followed shortly by the falling corpse. Several miles away, on a boat, Plagueeyes opened the eyes of the real Gato and smirked slightly at the completion of his plan. It wasn't often that he got to act or play a role as part of being a Sith, and he was an avid fan and supporter of the arts. The performance should have the desired effect and keep both himself and his student from being discovered. Zabuza may have suspected that he was up to something, but the former Kiri ninja didn't even know his plans to move to Snow Country or that he was still alive, so whatever he suspected would die with the fake body of Gato. Getting up from his seat in his cabin of the boat, he walked out of the room and to the front of the boat to look at the ocean. He never actually thought he would take such a craft across a large body of water. Going from one island of wave to another was rather different than traveling across the open ocean. He had flown starships and other spacecraft across the known and even unknown galaxy but was never ferried across an ocean by such an archaic boat before. It didn't have a high-tech generator or advanced propulsion system but a mere motor and propeller. It also didn't have any kind of technology for dampening the rocking motion of the waves or sensors of any kind, and if a storm approached, they would have to ride it out. While most people of the galaxy would have been completely put off by the boat and accommodations, he was not. He found the experience interesting, and as much as a Sith Lord could, he was looking forward to the long journey across an ocean that would normally take mere minutes with the more advanced technology that used to be readily available to him. Snow Country was many miles to the northeast, and there was much to do once they arrived. The Demon Brothers were with him, and they would need to unseal all of the items in the scrolls on the ship. He would need to meet with Dodo, the dictator of the country, and set up agreements and accommodations, but he doubted that would be a problem. Although Gato may be dead, most of the money the mogul had was transferred into other accounts that he still had access to when the one thing Snow Country needed was money, and he could provide it. The only foreseeable problems were that Dodo might try and double-cross him to take his money, but he already had plans to put a stop to that. The dictator of Snow Country thought he was a mere businessman with no chakra or abilities of any kind, but he was far more than that, and now so were the Demon Brothers. The best thing to do once they got there was to put Doto under his control. Naruto examined the body that was once disguised as his master. The scroll stated that the technique would end after the person who the jutsu was performed on was killed, but it didn't specifically state that the person would go back to their original form, which was that of the samurai that was working for his master. It was unfortunate that the ability of the technique was not lasting, meaning that the original body of the samurai was before him and not a copy of Gatu's. I suppose I'll have to work on my medical techniques to prepare for the Chunin exams and what I have planned. He thought and went about destroying the body. By this point, his master was likely several miles away on the ocean, and he was stuck with the cleanup duty until he left to get back to Konoha. He just had to turn in the mission report for the fake mission, and no one would know that he had spent the entire time in Wave Country. A part of him was thankful that his master hadn't just made him kill everyone that was involved in the events of Wave Country. He had nothing against Zabuza or the Hunter Nin and didn't want to kill them, though he did want to fight Zabuza again and perhaps the Hunter Nin too. He was still curious as to why his master had used drain knowledge on Kakashi instead of just knocking the Jonin out and waiting for him to arrive. It didn't make much sense to him. He had still been given the information by his master, which was not a very pleasant experience. Having information forced into his head was far more painful than he would have thought. In the end, he had gotten all of the techniques and jutsu that they had been after, but he still wasn't sure why it had been necessary. According to what Plagueis said, the technique of implanting knowledge into another being was rather dangerous. A person could forcibly give another person knowledge of a language or how to use a piece of technology, but apparently not the memories that went along with it. He had just learned of the technique itself, as this was the first time Plagueis had shown it to him. He had questioned why Plagueis hadn't just used the same technique when he was learning basic and learning how to read the language of the Sith species, but his master told him that the technique wasn't to be used for teaching in that manner. It could be used for a transfer of knowledge one time, and it was best to wait long periods of time before using it again because it was so unsafe. On some level, he was thankful that his master had not used the technique to teach him about the galaxy, as he didn't want to feel pain like that again, but it still made him wonder why Plagueis had used it in the first place. Was he just showing me the technique, or was there something else behind him using it on me? And that was something that he had been asking himself. He trusted Plagueis, and his master didn't always reveal everything to him or the reasons why he did things a certain way. It was likely that this was just another one of those times. It was unfortunate that the technique couldn't safely be used on memories, as it would have been useful to implant his memories of stealing village items into both Mizuki and Ao years earlier instead of just erasing their minds, as it would have completely pinned the blame on both. Perhaps he could look into it for the future. Regardless of his suspicions about what his master might be up to, it seemed that it wouldn't be long before he was in Snow Country building the reactor and preparing the ship for takeoff. He idly wondered if Zabuza had found the gift that he left behind yet. It shouldn't be that hard to find, especially since I could feel his confusion and skepticism earlier. Moving through the trees, Zabuza and Haku made their way to the warehouse that was on the edge of Wave Country that Gato had built. Zabuza was suspicious of everything that had happened a few hours before, and he wanted to check on the ship that Haku told him about a few months ago. They had agreed to stop fighting with the Konoha ninja because the client was dead and the contract was void, so they had no reason to go after Tazuna or do anything else in Wave. Zabuza was surprised when Kakashi told him that they had until Team 7 returned to Konoha before someone would find out that he had been hiding in Wave Country. He had gone over everything that had happened and things still weren't adding up. Gato wasn't stupid, and I don't think he would have actually thought he could face me with only a few bandits. He thought, but that also assumed that he was fighting against Kakashi as hard as he could, which didn't happen. He had conserved as much chakra and stamina as possible during the battle to make sure that they weren't double-crossed, which he had started suspecting after Gato helped the Konoha ninja to escape. It made him wonder what Gato was really after when he had taken a tissue sample of Kakashi's dojutsu. Why would a shipping mobile want to have samples of bloodlines? The thing he needed to check right now was to see if the boat was still docked at the pier by the secret warehouse. If the boat was gone, then he wasn't sure what to believe anymore. Running across the water to the last island in the chain, Haku led him to the area where the warehouse and dock were. They came to a stop at the area only to find no warehouse and a dock with no ship. The area where the warehouse used to be was easy to find, as it was now a large area of dried mud with two items sitting in the very middle. One was a large briefcase and the other was a scroll sitting on top of it. Stopping Haku from going any closer, Zabuza created a water clone to investigate the objects while both stood a good distance away. If someone did want them dead, then it could easily be a trap. Then again, he still didn't know what was really going on. The clone opened up the case and showed the contents to both real ninja. It was filled with money, likely the exact amount we were owed for our services. Thought Zabuza, and he wasn't sure why he knew that, but it just seemed to fit the strange situation they were in. The clone opened the scroll and also further examined the contents of the case to look for any traps or explosive notes, but found none. Walking over, the clone handed the letter to Zabuza. Beginning to read the letter, his eyes widened as he recognized that it was to him and that the writing style as that of Gozu. What the hell? He thought and continued reading. Zabuza. By now you've found the money that our new client left for your services while in Wave Country. It should be the amount you agreed upon. We got a better offer from the cloaked brat and started working for him. Too bad you didn't want to extend your contract. The perks are way better than the original deal with Gato, Gozu and Meizu. P.S. We never really liked you. Zabuza stared at the letter and then gave it over to Haku, who also read the letter and tilted her head slightly to the side as she looked at it. What does this mean, Zabuza-sama? She asked as she tried to piece together all of the events that she had witnessed as Zabuza did the same. They had found out information about Gato before meeting him, and the man turned out to be different from what they had heard. They first met him after the cloaked boy seemingly attacked him, but that had been written off as a test. What if it wasn't a test? Thought Zabuza, and wondered if the cloaked brat was behind everything that had happened in Wave Country. Could he have controlled Gato the entire time we were here? He thought, and it made sense. Gato's strange behavior and everything else that had happened could all have been the result of the cloaked assassin that they knew little about. The brat obviously must have stolen everything that Gato had and put it in the boat. He was controlling Gato the entire time. Not only that, but he made sure to get the shorty killed to make sure that no one could find out about the theft. It did make sense in a way, but it left one question, and that was, who was the cloaked brat? He didn't have an answer for that and didn't know the brat's name or any identifying characteristics about him besides his height, a general description of clothing, and the sword. What was worse was that even if he knew it to be true, who else could he possibly convince that it was true? No one would believe a story like that. Some kid out of nowhere with unknown powers took control of one of the richest men in the world and bled him dry. Then he managed to get away with it. He concluded, and he and Haku were the only witnesses or people that actually knew what had happened. The Konoha ninja knew nothing of the brat. It was rather scary that he could be used so easily by someone so young, and it seemed the Demon Brothers were now with that same person. Frankly, he was glad to be rid of them and wondered how long they would last under their new employer, or if the brat was even the real employer or just worked for someone else. The entire situation gave him a headache. Looking to the briefcase of money, he made a decision. I don't know if we'll ever find out what really happened here, and I don't really want to know. Let's just take the money and go, stated Zabuza, and he grabbed the briefcase while Haku followed behind him as they headed for the main harbor in Wave to get on a ship. Weeks later, Konoha. Kakashi just finished going over the mission report to the Sandaime. They stayed in Wave a few weeks longer until the bridge was completed, and then they headed back to Konoha. Zabuza had disappeared after the fight, and Kakashi didn't really care where the man was headed. The mission had been upgraded to an A rank, and Wave Country was able to pay them because of an anonymous donation of money to the village. The Sandaime dismissed him and Kakashi left the office. Putting the file onto the stack on his desk, the Sandaime went about finishing up the rest of the work he had to do. A little while later, the secretary came in and took the files away. She sorted them into the stack of files that were going to the archives to be stored among the other mission reports and other ninja files of the village, as well as the ninja library. Sweating profusely, Izumo and Kotetsu each carried a very heavy stack of files up the long staircase to the ninja archives and ninja library, which were both together in the Hokage Mountain. It was a hot day, and they actually wished they were still on gate duty instead. Being messenger boys for the Hokage was a common job for them. They were led into archives and walked past Uzumaki Naruto, who was sitting in at one of the many tables and copying information from a library scroll to one he had brought with him. Naruto glanced up briefly but gave no indication that he had really noticed them or cared. They proceeded through the library section and into one of the many filing rooms. The stacks were set down and they went to work filing everything into where it was supposed to go. A couple hours later, both Chunins emerged from the filing room and walked past Naruto again to leave. They also walked past a cloaked ANBU that headed to same file room the two Chunin had just left. Sifting through the filing cabinets, the ANBU found the correct file Danzo-sama wanted and copied its contents. Root Headquarters. A file was placed in front of him by one of his Root ANBU, and he peered through its contents with his right eye exposed to memorize everything. Technically, he could have just gone to the archives himself and looked at the file there, but he didn't want to be seen entering the archives or looking at the mission report. He had already received Shin's report on the mission and wanted to see the written mission report submitted by Kakashi, which would likely have more information that may not have been known to the young Root ninja. The mission seemed normal enough, and the only thing that stood out was the fact that Team 7 was not killed by Momochi Zabuza but rather captured. However, he considered that Gato wasn't completely foolish and knew that if he had killed Konoha Ninja, then the village would not sit by idly. It was one thing for ninja to be killed on duty by other ninja or accidents, but having an entire genin team killed by a greedy businessman was not something that the village would stand for. When Kakashi and his team didn't return or send any message concerning the status of the mission, more ninja would be sent after them, and that would bring far more attention to Wave Country than Gato likely wanted. His own unsanctioned missions to Wave Country revealed that the Kyuubi container had secretly traveled to Wave Country several times in a 6-month period and that the boy was visiting Gato. It was unclear what the two talked about, as the scroll Sai had sent him was gibberish except for a few names, which were the boy's genin teammates and also Orochimaru's. That one name in the conversation set off alarm bells for him, and he tried to find some kind of connection between Orochimaru and Gato or Orochimaru and Uzumaki Naruto. The search had come up empty and his men could find nothing connecting those names together. He had also checked the genin mentioned and did find that they had failed the Chunin exams an exorbitant amount of times, and it made him suspicious about those two genin. He would have Shin look into it in the next Chunin exams, which they would all likely be participating in. Any information about what Uzumaki was doing with Gato was now lost, as the shipping tycoon had been killed by Momochi Zabuza. The mission file also mentioned a fake hunter Nin, which was likely the person that Sai spotted following the Kyuubi container. Nothing about the situation made much sense, and the only people who could give him more information were unobtainable. He couldn't have the Jinchuriki interrogated or questioned, and he wasn't foolish enough to send his ninja after Momochi Zabuza and a Hayotan user. If the former Kiri ninja could evade or kill Hunter Nin for so long, then his Root ANBU would likely not stand a chance against the silent killing skills of Zabuza. He considered trying to have Fu search the Jinchuriki's mind, but that could be very dangerous, as it was not known if a person could mindwalk in the mind of a Jinchuriki, and he wasn't willing to risk losing Fu to find out.
This left only one option, which was to continue surveillance on the Kyubi container in hopes that something else would be discovered. Something would turn up eventually and he would find some answers about what the boy was doing in Wave Country and meeting with Gatu.
Chapter 12, Chunin Exams.
Stretching and pulling at the collar of his new pair of clothes, an annoyed Naruto thought, why do these uniforms have to be so tight at the collar and so cumbersome? I don't even see why Chunin examiners need to wear these things anyway. Standing in front of the mirror, Naruto looked over his new gray uniform that he had to purchase with his own money for use in the Chunin exams. It was obvious that he would never wear it again, and it seemed rather stupid to have a uniform that was only used for one purpose. Most of the uniforms of this type were used by the Intelligence and Interrogations Department of Konoha, but the Chunin helping with the exams were supposed to wear them because Marino Ibiki demanded it of them. Frowning, Naruto walked away from the mirror as he couldn't stand to look at the dull uniform clothing anymore.
He'd take his black cloak and something comfortable underneath it any day.
Staring at the clock, he resisted the urge to smash it as he still had over an hour before he needed to be at the academy to prepare for the exam. He would be working on the first part of the examen as a spotter for cheating students, and then he would work a shift on the second exam patrolling the fence to the Forest of Death. Neither were duties that he wanted, but he needed something during the second exam, and the best way to get it was to be assigned to patrol the fence for contestants that tried to leave the designated area. He had specifically asked for that assignment as it was better than being on call to be summoned by the open scrolls when Genin passed the second exam. Laying on his bed, he waited for enough time to pass while he reviewed the plans he had created, and that his master had revised, in his head. To get what he wanted during the second exam, it was best to be on patrol and then switch with one of his clones to enter the forest. After he had what he wanted, he needed to make the proper alterations. In a week, he had to take the special Jonin exam, which involved a series of tests to determine his proficiency. He had been sponsored for the test by the Jonin sensei of his first squad. He also needed to find out what exactly was going to be happening during the Chunin exam, as he had been unable to find anything else out from indirect means and needed a more direct approach to gather the information. Kabuto was the best target for this, but Yoroi would likely be easier. However, the mask-wearing man might not have the detailed information that Kabuto did. During the time between his final trip to Wave Country and the exam, he had worked on learning the jutsu that his master had taken from Hatake Kakashi. It turned out that the copy ninja really knew almost 1,000 jutsu, and it would take quite a while to learn them all, so Naruto had written them all down in a large scroll before he started forgetting any. Currently he was looking at a jutsu of the Yondaime Hokage which was called the Rasengan. He currently didn't have the time to start the technique, but should be able to get to it after the exams. Staring up at the ceiling, he wondered what his master was up to in Snow Country. Looking over the device once again, Plague Eyes was no less intrigued than when he had first encountered it a few weeks ago. In fact, the more he found out about it, the more interested he became in it, and knew that his student would want several in order to figure out how they worked and probably make use of them. He had been in a private meeting with Kazuhana Dodo, the leader of Snow Country, discussing further negotiations. The man was getting more greedy and wanted more money for his continued assistance, but it didn't matter at the time, and Plague Eyes agreed to everything that the man said. As Doto was distracted with extorting money from his business partner, he never noticed the dark purple smoke streams that slowly moved into the room through the air ducts. 2 streams of smoke moved across the floor heading for Doto. A string of smoke formed to connect the 2 smoke plumes, and they began to solidify behind Doto. The string of smoke was thrown at the dictator, and it solidified into the chain that connected the Demon Brothers' gauntlets. Doto was distracted enough, and the attack was quiet enough, that the man didn't notice anything until the chain was already solidified and wrapped around his body. Plague Eyes had believed that he had the advantage, but then Doto smiled and, with something other than strength, broke the chain imprisoning him. The broken chain turned back to smoke and Doto attacked Plague Eyes. Sith Lord reacted by using force push. With his diminished state, the attack wasn't enough to knock Doto back, but did nearly topple the man over. Before Doto could do anything else, Demon Brothers got over their surprise and grabbed Doto while holding him down for their master. Plague Eyes cautiously approached the subdued man and used the force to determine what was going on. From what he could tell, the normal chakra field emanating from the man was being modified and even amplified to form almost a personal shield around him. He hadn't noticed it before because he wasn't looking for anything out of the ordinary, and the device seemed to be very passive until it was used.
Touching his hand to Dodo's head, Plagueis drained the man's knowledge and put the man's mind under his control.
Once he had everything that he needed, the demon brothers knocked the man out and went about removing the dark blue armor that was under the man's loose clothing. Plagueis examined the device and went over what information he had extracted from Dodo's head. It was a very advanced piece of technology that was called chakra armor. Dodo didn't have a very good grasp of how it worked or what went into making it, only that it cost a great deal of money and was apparently going to help the leader of Snow Country take over the world. At least that was what the dictator envisioned for the device if it wasn't so costly to make or he had the money to make it feasible. Dodo's armor was supposedly a prototype and more advanced than the other chakra armor devices he had given to his subordinates. Since then, Plagueis had been using his mind control on Dodo and also went to the actual scientists behind the device's creation.
An entire research and development lab existed in Dodo's huge mansion.
There, many different scientists not only created and developed the chakra armor but all of the other higher-level technology that Snow Country had. While many of the other projects that the scientists were working on were not that impressive technology-wise, the chakra armor was a technological marvel. From what Plagueis knew, the majority of the known galaxy had completely stopped using personal shielding devices. Trying to find one was extremely difficult and they drained a power source extremely fast. There were also other factors such as radiation that was produced from them. However, thousands of years earlier, personal shielding was much more common. From what he had read in stolen military records, it appeared that the technology had stagnated during the time of peace and had been lost entirely. The device was therefore very unique, even though it relied on chakra and not another power source. Plagueis had yet to inform his student about it as he knew that once he did, Naruto would likely have arrived in the country a day later to get his hands on such a device. They still had plans that needed to be taken care of in Konoha, and he couldn't distract his student with something so tempting as the chakra armor. Danzo was likely still trying to figure out what was going on with the village Jinchuriki, and it wouldn't be wise for Naruto to leave the village for an extended period of time again, especially during the busy time around the Chunin exams. Once their plans were completed, and his student had arrived in Snow Country without complication, then he would inform the boy of the device. After taking control of the country, Plagueis had begun working on mass production of the sealant needed for the ship's hull. It would need quite a bit of the substance, and the sealant itself required multiple chemical processes and the creation of a small chemical factory. He projected that it would take a few months to complete that task. Production of fuel for the fusion reaction would take more time. Considering that it didn't take more than a week to get from the known galaxy to their current position in the unknown galaxy, the amount of fuel required was small, but they needed isotopes of hydrogen in order to create the reaction that would fuel the ship. Based upon his own knowledge and how easy it was to control all of the scientists that Dodo had, Plagueis believed that it would only take half a year for everything to be completed. Naruto's shadow clones would come in very handy, and once the boy arrived in the country, the new reactor could be created. Gata's money, as well as Dodo's technology and workforce, had greatly accelerated his initial estimates on how long it would take to leave the planet. Without any complication, he foresaw that they would be leaving the planet and heading back to the known galaxy before his student turned 13. When the smoke cleared, Naruto stood along with 12 other Chunin and Marino Ibiki in the testing room for the first stage of the Chunin exam. Looking over the faces of the participants, he noted that he'd been with most of the Konoha ninja at one point or another during his years at the academy. He spotted Kabuto and Yoroi, as well as someone he didn't expect to see as their teammate, which was the pale-skinned boy that was spying on him in Wave Country. He believed his name to be Sai. Naruto watched the boy talk with another ninja on one of the rookie teams, and they seemed to know each other.
Danzo suspects my former teammates of something?
He guessed as the possible reasoning behind the boy being in the exams. He did know that on one of the messages Danzo received were the names of his former teammates along with Orochimaru, so it was possible that the boy was sent to spy on them. He hadn't gotten any message about it from either mind-controlled root ANBU, which likely meant that whatever the boy was doing didn't involve him and only his former teammates. Ibiki made a speech that Naruto didn't listen to, and then the genin were given random numbers and split up around the classroom. As the students were finding their seats, Naruto moved to the seat he would be occupying for the exam, which was along the window. The room had 2 columns of desks with numerous rows and a walkway in between. He had a view of a good portion of the room, but for the exam he was only concerned with 2 rows of desks that were along the window side of the room. He would determine if or how the genin in those rows were cheating and deduct points from them based on how many times they were caught by him. The test started while he was thinking, and he was instantly aware of a few genin that were contemplating cheating. With the test atmosphere, the instructions, the stress, and the questions of the test, he could get a much better read on those near him because their minds were so preoccupied with other things. From his own experience in the exams, it would take a few minutes for the majority of them to figure out the real purpose of the test, and then most would make their move. The only problem with the system was that he could only dock 2 points when he caught certain people cheating, and that was all the points that he could dock. A few competitors only used one method of cheating, and although they were rather obvious with it, he couldn't take off more points if they used that method to cheat for the entire exams. He already noted that 2 Hyuga had started using their Byakugan to cheat. They would likely use it for the entire exam, and though it was blatantly obvious they were using it, if he was the Chunin observing them, he could only deduct 2 points for the cheating. His attention moved back to his own rows, and he frowned at the bun-haired girls sitting in them. It was the same girl that had repeatedly tried to get information on his sword and had broken into his apartment. Since that time, no other attempts had been made on his apartment, and he believed this was due to him always carrying the sword on his person from that point on. He noted that she had managed to place a complicated mirror system in a depression on the ceiling and, using wires, she was moving the mirrors to get the answers from the reflections of other people's papers. He deducted 2 points, but he couldn't deduct any more unless she did something else. Focusing on the other people in his designated area, he started taking off points for the other cheaters. As time passed during the exam, he managed to kick out quite a few people from his rows. The 2 rows originally held 18 people, and he had managed to take that down to 7. The remaining genin were safe from his influence though, and he really couldn't take any more points from them. He had already taken an extra 2 points from the bun-haired girl for helping out her teammate, but that was the extent of what he could do. Looking to the kunoichi in question, he noticed that she was looking at him. Glancing in the direction she indicated, he saw that her mirrors were angled so that he could see something that was being reflected off of the back of her paper. It read, "Can I see your sword after the exam?" And Naruto frowned at the sender that was looking at him expectantly. Explicitly shaking his head no, the girl looked sad and wrote something else, "Please?" Twitching slightly, Naruto's eyes narrowed and he again shook his head. Looking over the test takers, Ibiki's eyes darted to specific people in the exam and he observed them cheating. It wasn't until his eyes came upon a bun-haired girl that he stopped. Focusing on the scene, he watched as one of the participants engaged in a hidden conversation with one of his Chunin. He noted that the 2 rows that the Chunin was monitoring were mostly empty and more genin had been eliminated in those rows than any other set in the room. Deciding that his Chunin wasn't slacking off, he allowed the conversation to continue. He never had a participant try and seduce an examiner before. It was something that he would have to look into in the future and perhaps plan for. Most of the Chunin in the room were much older than most of the present genin, though a few genin were even older than his Chunin. It wasn't often that the Chunin proctoring knew the genin taking the exam. He had genin try to bribe examiners, but none ever succeeded. This was a new tactic as genin kunoichi were never given seduction missions. Looking between the 2, he assumed that the girl was asking for answers or perhaps to have her deductions removed. He couldn't actually see the mirror reflection that was being used, but those were the obvious conclusions from the situation. Naruto once again shook his head and continued to try not to attack the girl for wanting to see his sword. He really couldn't do anything about it. Points could not be deducted because she wasn't cheating, merely trying to coerce him into letting her see his sword.
His hand almost instinctively went up to the blade that was attached to his back, but he remembered that it was just the fake. Looking to his arm that was mostly covered by his gray sleeve, he could see that the blade was still in the storage seal. He raised his head to look back at the kunoichi and saw that she had written another message, just for 5 minutes. He rolled his eyes at the message as he knew that if he even let her near his sword, which he wouldn't, she would run away with it. Trying to calm down, he took several deep breaths. Just the thought of knowing that someone was planning to steal his sword made him rather angry, and he hadn't noticed how much until the lights above him started flickering. Getting his emotions under control, he once again shook his head and this time tried to ignore the girl in favor of focusing on the remaining few people in his area. Frustrated at her lack of success and the fact that the indirect target of her obsession was ignoring her, Tenten decided to try a different approach. Searching through her ninja pouch, she retrieved one of the mirrors she had brought with her and tried to get the right angle to catch the sun. The test was during the afternoon and the sun was not yet setting but low enough on the horizon that its rays came in through the window. Getting the correct angle, she reflected the sun back at the boy's face while holding the mirror at the level of her seat. Squinting because of the bright light that was blinding him, Naruto's attention was again taken back to the girl. I should have done something about her a while ago. He thought and frowned at the girl that was trying to blind him with the glare off her mirror. She was rewarded with success a moment later when a shuriken smashed the mirror and embedded into the bench she was sitting on. She now had the angered Chunin's attention again and wrote another note on the back of her paper. While people had heard the smashing mirror, most had no idea where it came from and disregarded it in favor of the test a moment later. He had manipulated the shuriken to fly below the height of the desk so that no one would see it and had it curve at the last moment to smash the mirror. Wishing that he had the authority to fail the genin, he glared at the girl who was writing something on her paper again. She finished a moment later and angled the mirrors for him to read, "I'll give you something in return." And when he looked to the girl, she seductively winked. Trying to fight the blush creeping up on his face, he failed, damn it. He cursed inside his head and the window behind him cracked under his unknowing use of the force to vent his anger and embarrassment at the situation. The worst part was that he was in the uniform and didn't have his hood or any mask, so the blush on his cheeks was there for everyone to see. The cracking of the window glass also brought some attention to himself from those sitting near him, both Chunin and Genin. This just keeps getting worse, he thought, and the lights starting flickering again. Hearing some chuckling, he looked to the Chunin sitting next to him and realized that the man could likely read the mirror and had seen it. Naruto blared at the man. A moment later, 2 of the legs of the chair the man was sitting in broke and the surprised Chunin yelled while crashing to the floor. Looking back to the girl, he glared at her for making fun of him. Tenten looked back at her paper and decided perhaps that it wasn't a good idea to antagonize the boy anymore. She didn't know how the window or chair broke, but the killing intent coming off the boy as well as the flickering of the lights made her rethink her strategy. It was at that point that Ibiki spoke up. 45 minutes had elapsed and it was time for the final question. The exam had finished and the next examiner had come to take the genin. Naruto was quick to leave and take up his duties patrolling the area surrounding the Forest of Death. He had used his spare time during the first exam to figure out the best candidates that he was looking for. He required someone that was nearly his height and weight and there were only a few to choose from that fit the criteria. He removed the Konoha ninja from his selection process as most didn't fit his criteria or were the heirs of a clan and a disappearance would not go unnoticed or without an investigation. There were several others to choose from and he found 3 that fit what he was looking for. He just needed to find them during the exam and wait. The forest might end up killing them anyway, but he needed a specific death. The use of his weapons were out and it would be best to have it be as natural as possible for his purposes. While the genin were getting scrolls for the exams, he proceeded to switch himself with a shadow clone and entered the examination area. He knew that he had to stay completely hidden from view and used an earth jutsu to sink into the ground. From what intelligence that he had, a Hyuga could not look through the ground or other objects unless they were specifically focusing on them. It seemed few Hyuga ever looked beneath them as he had tried it out several times on the Hyuga boy that had followed him on several occasions. He had once even moved himself directly beneath the Hyuga while the Byakugan was active and the boy never saw him. Considering that there were 2 Hyuga in the exam, it would be best if he didn't get noticed while moving through the forest and completing his goals. At least one of them had his chakra memorized, so if he was seen by Hyuga Niji, he would be recognized. He had kept his clothing the same and wasn't using his cloak, as if he was spotted it was best to be in his uniform, so he at least had a weak excuse. He could tell people that part of a genin team asked for his help to find their missing teammate in the forest, which was a viable reason that a patrolling chunin could enter the exam area. Naruto's head emerged from behind the fence and he looked at the genin that had just finished getting their scrolls. He would follow one of his targets at a time and see if he could create a situation, or the situation would create itself, to get the resulting death that he wanted. Several hours later. Following the first genin led to nothing of interest as the genin's team were easily defeated and killed by some kind of leeches that fell from the trees. Wounds such as that were not what he was looking for, so he went about finding the second target. Moving through the ground and sensing with his life signs ability, he slowly searched through the forest. The method he was using was annoying, but it ensured that he wouldn't be caught doing anything he wasn't supposed to be doing. Sensing movement, he stopped and focused on listening and feeling through the ground. He could feel a genin moving through the area above him. From what he could tell, the genin was on the same team as his second target. The genin was all alone and he could feel the fear, anxiety, and stress coming from him. Along with those feelings came the realization that his teammates were likely dead. The boy moved on in search of a way out of the terrible forest and Naruto proceeded in the direction that the boy came from. Mentally sending a message to his patrolling shadow clone, the clone moved to where the genin would likely exit the forest. Moving out of the ground, Naruto sped through the trees in search of the other genin on the team. It was much faster above ground and he now had an excuse to be in the forest. Holding the earth scroll and running for her life, the redhead looked back once more at the gigantic bear that was chasing her. It was catching up to her and the thoughts of her approaching death filled her mind. She was likely going to die here and be eaten by the bear. One of her teammates was likely already dead and she was separated from the other one. Ever since their sensei had sponsored them for the chunin exams, she knew it was a bad idea. Her skills were not that of a chunin and neither were her teammates, but one other genin team from the hidden grass village were going and they were supposed to meet up with them to ensure finalists in the exam. They couldn't find them and now she was going to die. She had already tried screaming for help, but the area they were in was huge and no one had heard her, or they just didn't want to get involved with the giant bear chasing her. Jumping over large roots, her foot slipped on moss. She fell to the forest floor and her glasses came off during the impact. Cursing, she frantically searched for them as the sounds of the bear grew closer. Without her glasses all she could see was a blurry world with little detail. Her hands passed over the sparse grass and leaves for the glasses that she desperately needed. It was too late though, as the bear was just behind her and had caught up. Trying to get up, she stumbled and fell back to the ground. In a panic, she tried to put as much distance between herself and the bear and crawled as far as she could until she ran into a hard surface. Turning around she saw the blurry brown of a tree trunk and looked back to the lumbering shape of what she knew was the bear. She couldn't move and her voice left her as the growling bear came closer. The heavy breathing and growl of the creature was all she could hear. Tears filled her eyes and she wished she was somewhere else, anywhere else. Her fear was overriding all of her other senses, including her chakra sensor ability, which would have been telling her that someone was headed her way. Naruto moved in search of the genin he was after. If the boy was dead and the manner of death was acceptable for his needs, then his search would be over and he could work on completing the secondary objectives. He really didn't want to have to kill a genin that he had never met before in order to complete the plans that he and his master had come up with. However, he would kill one of them if it came to it. Pushing his sensor range as far as he could, he detected a very large animal and a single person. Moving towards that direction, he landed on a branch and inspected the scene. One large bear and one kunoichi. Not the person I was after, he concluded. A moment later he was assaulted by the feelings of the girl he was looking at. The mission was supposed to come first, but he could feel everything that the girl was feeling and he couldn't leave her to die. Gathering and compacting kinetic energy into his hand, he jumped down to the forest floor below. He had a new force technique that he had been waiting to try out, and this was the perfect time. Most people think that a person's life flashes before their eyes in the moments before death, but all that flashed through Karen's eyes was the blurry image of a huge bear as its mouth lunged to eat her. She was moments from death when a gray figure entered her distorted vision. The bear slowed and her attention moved to the gray object. It took but a moment to figure out that it was a person, and she could feel the chakra emanating from them. "Someone's helping me," she thought. She watched and felt as the person used something against the bear. Landing on the ground, Naruto looked at the bear with a smirk as it noticed him. "Kind tight," he thought, and moved his arm back, then pushed forward with all his strength. He even added some wind chakra to help propel the condensed ball of kinetic energy at the target. The ball struck the shoulder and neck of the bear and sent the animal sideways while lifting it off of its front paws. The bear thudded to the ground and remained breathing but unmoving. Naruto inspected the animal for a minute and wondered what would have happened if he had used the technique at its most powerful. He only used it at around half of its potential power to see what kind of damage it could do. He had a feeling that if he used it at full strength, then the bear's neck and shoulder would have been pulverized. The technique itself was still something he was working on, as he didn't have a place to properly use it and test its limits. He already had a few modifications that he wanted to make to it and could see altering it into a new technique as well. The wind chakra was just to speed up its delivery. Normally the ball was just thrown, and with initial testing, he knew that most ninja could dodge the slow speed of the throw. Therefore, he had worked on trying to push the ball with his strength and wind chakra to propel it forward faster than throwing it could accomplish. The results are quite good. This might become one of my new favorites, he thought, and smiled a rather sinister smile. Turning around, he looked at the girl behind him. She was looking in his direction but with her eyes closed. After the bear was knocked out, Karen finally found and put on her glasses to look upon her savior. The boy had walked over to look at the bear and she frowned. It wasn't that she wasn't happy about being saved, but something was wrong. She had been focusing on her sensor ability when the boy attacked the bear and everything seemed off. Whatever technique he used wasn't chakra, it was something else. She didn't actually see the technique as she had only just found her glasses, but it was very strange to her. The boy himself was strange as well. In addition to his incredibly large chakra reserves, he had something else that seemed to be flowing into him and out of him. What exactly it was, she had no idea, but when he had formed the attack, some of the other stuff entering his body was used to help form it. She stared at the boy to see if she could figure anything else out, but she couldn't find anything. Closing her eyes, she focused on sensing as best as she could. In addition to the boy's chakra, he also had something else flowing into and out of his body. It was not something she had ever felt before, and it felt slightly dark. Focusing more on the boy, she felt his emotions and could tell that he was hiding or suppressing all of his emotions while only showing indifference or coldness as well as some hatred. Opening her eyes, she noted that the boy was staring at her curiously and she could feel something happening. She looked into his cold blue eyes and, not thinking before she spoke, she blurted out the question she had been holding in. What kind of technique was that? You didn't even use chakra, you used something else. Naruto stared at the girl with as impassive a face as he could, but on the inside, he was rather shocked at what she had said. His mind went through many possibilities, however he searched his feeling and found the explanation he was after. She can feel me using the force. He thought, amazed, but he wasn't sure what to do about it. Should he kill her and not let her tell anyone else? Should he destroy her memory? Those options were not something he really wanted to do. From what he could tell, the girl was a chakra sensor, but he needed to find out more. What exactly did you feel? He questioned seriously, and he could feel the girl getting more afraid. Shit, why did I say anything? Karen thought as her eyes glanced around for a way out of the situation. She could feel the surprise and the anger in the person standing before her.
She didn't actually know what it was that she had felt, but the moment she said something, she was positive that it was something she shouldn't know about, and it was possible that he was going to kill her. As if reading her mind, the boy stated, "The more you tell me about what you felt, the more likely you are of getting out of this situation unharmed." Karen was frozen on the spot and knew that he was telling the truth and that what she did next could decide whether she lived or died. The statement was not a lie, so she confessed everything. "When you attacked, I could feel you gathering something inside your body and moving it to your hand, but it wasn't chakra." "You didn't use chakra, but something very different. Even now I can feel it moving through you, but I don't know what it is or where it comes from." The explanation she gave was an odd one, and it made Naruto stop and think. On the one hand, the girl seemed to be able to feel the force, yet she didn't confess to feeling it all around her and apparently only when it moved through his body. While the force had moved into his hand through his body, it had also moved from the surrounding area. The girl seemed to only be able to feel the force that was moving through his body. Without any midichlorians, she shouldn't be able to feel the force, and yet she can, but only in my body and not in the surroundings. Is it possible that the force that enters my body somehow changes or causes her to be able to feel it? He wondered, and the question was difficult to answer. To his knowledge, no one had been able to feel him using the force. Even the accomplished chakra sensor working for Danzo was only able to sense that something was different about him. The Yamanaka couldn't tell what it was though. However, the girl in front of him was very different. She appeared to have a unique sensing ability. That alone made her valuable, as he himself had no ability to sense chakra and limited ability to suppress it. It was possible that her chakra sensing range was larger than his life sense range. Furthermore, chakra sensors usually had good chakra control and didn't develop a sensing ability until an older age. To complete the plan to get me out of this village, I could use someone with good chakra control, and she could learn to use medical ninjutsu much better than I could likely use it. If her chakra sensing ability turns out to have a larger range than my ability, then she would also be useful. Master Playguys might also be interested in her ability to sense the force moving through me. He concluded and made a decision. "You'll be coming with me," he said, and waited a brief moment before continuing. "We need to find your other teammate and complete another task before leaving the training ground. As long as you don't say anything or speak to anyone about anything that has happened, besides me stopping the bear from getting you, nothing will happen to you," stated Naruto in a serious voice, and Karen could only nod. She could tell that he hadn't lied to her, and with the other dangers in the forest, it was best to stick with him. Survival was her priority right now, and she went with the mysterious Konoha ninja that had saved her. Traveling through the forest on the path that the bear took was rather easy. It left prints, scratches, and broken branches in its wake that made it simple for anyone to follow. From what Karen told him, her teammate was injured when they were first attacked by the bear. She had only a basic idea of where the body might be, but she was positive that he was dead, as his chakra had faded until she couldn't feel it anymore. Eventually they came upon the spot, and Karen held back while Naruto inspected the corpse. Looking over the body, he deduced from Amachi's knowledge and Karen's details what must have happened. The bear swung and hit him, sending him into the tree. He hit at least one branch on the way down before landing awkwardly on the ground. The body has multiple broken bones, fractured skull, and other related injuries from the hit and the fall. No signs of damage from the claws. "I can definitely use this," he thought, and pulled out a scroll to seal the body into. That was the best that he could hope for. Ideally, he wanted a body that had been hit by a jutsu or killed by ninja tools, but one that suffered a fall from a great height was usable. He just needed to preserve the body until he could work on it later. Once the body was sealed, they continued on, as there was still one thing left to do. The next target he had to go after before heading to the tower was either Kabuto or Yoroi. He needed information about the attack on the village, and one of those two would likely have what he wanted. He knew from past experiences that both liked to split up while moving in the Forest of Death, and with a new teammate, it was more likely that he would find Kabuto alone than Yoroi alone. Karen followed the boy through the trees, and it seemed that the forest wasn't nearly as scary or dangerous as it had been with her team. She was on the lookout for chakra signatures as they determined that her ability had a longer range than the ability that Naruto had. She still wasn't sure what ability in sensing the boy possessed or what other abilities he was granted by his secondary energy, but she wasn't going to ask. Upon further examination with her sensing ability, she also felt a very malicious chakra inside of him, but it was dormant and contained in some way. It scared her, but there was nothing she could do at the moment. She was positive that she wouldn't survive on her own and wasn't sure where in the forest of death they were. She was brought out of her thoughts by a commotion up ahead. Stopping on the branch she was on, Naruto looked at her and she explained, "There is a battle up ahead." Naruto looked at her for a second and then looked ahead of them. She knew that he likely couldn't feel it and looked back at her for more details. One of them is very powerful while the other is not. Neither feels like a genin. She elaborated for him. Taking a deep breath, Naruto sighed as neither ninja was likely to be the two he was after. While Kabuto did have more chakra than a genin, who would the glasses-wearing ninja be fighting that had that much chakra? He wasn't sure but decided to check it out anyway. Stabbing the kunai through her hand and into the hand of her former sensei, Anko forced the fingers of his other hand into a specific seal and prepared to use the kenjutsu that would end both of their lives. Stopping when she heard his voice come from behind her, she turned to see her unharmed sensei and looked back to see the one she had pinned to the trunk of the tree turn to mud. Frustrated, she pulled the kunai from her hand and threw it at the man that had ruined her life and abandoned her. Chuckling, Orochimaru caught the kunai between his two fingers and let it drop to the branch below where it stuck into the wood with a dull thunk. Moving forward, he proceeded to put his hands into a seal and made his former apprentice double over in pain. He started talking about how he had marked the Uchiha and then stopped when he felt something. Naruto looked at the scene that was playing out not too far away from where he and Karen were crouched in the foliage of the tree. It seemed Orochimaru was in the exam, or at least doing something in the forest of death. His master had given him explicit instructions not to try and fight the snake Sannin, and he was holding to those orders, though he did want to go and fight. He had only just gotten there and heard the tail end of the Sannin admitting to have attacked someone, but he didn't catch the name of the person. The talking stopped a moment later, and it wasn't until the man turned to where they were sitting and chuckled that he knew he had been spotted. He must be able to sense my chakra, thought Naruto, and he cursed at the fact that his high reserves had once again made him easy to detect. "Kuku, it seems we have a visitor," stated Orochimaru while looking in his direction, and Naruto frowned as the man had only used visitor and not visitors, which meant that he either didn't consider Karen a threat, or the girl was able to completely hide her chakra signature. Believing it was the latter, Naruto left the area he was hiding in. He didn't need to tell Karen to stay where she was, as the girl was scared beyond measure at seeing the examiner so easily defeated. She may not know who the person was, but she must have felt from his tainted chakra that he was not someone to mess with. Naruto appeared in a burst of speed on a branch of a tree that was not very far away. He stared at Orochimaru, and the man was not intimidated or the least bit threatened by his presence. It made him want to disobey his master's orders, but he stayed put. "As I was just about to say, before we were interrupted, you are not stopped the exams prematurely. 3 from my village are also taking the exams, and I'm going to enjoy watching. If you try to end that enjoyment, the Leaf Village will be finished," he concluded and started melding into the tree. It was difficult to stand and be ignored by someone, but he didn't attack, even when given the opportunity while the man was melding into the tree. He had caught several stray thoughts during the short conversation, and from the image of the musical note, he knew that the ones Orochimaru was talking about were the sound ninja. They might have the knowledge that I seek as well. And he filed the information away for later. If by some chance he couldn't find Kabuto or Yoroi, he would go after the sound ninja. Disappointed at his master's orders, he jumped to the branch and helped Mitarashi Enko stand. "What the hell are you doing here? I ordered everyone to stay put and only the ANBU should have followed me. Do you want to get yourself killed?" demanded Enko, and Naruto merely replied, "A genin came to edge of the forest and gave up. One of his teammates was possibly dead, the other lost, and he was carrying their scroll." I went in search of the lost genin as there is no way they can finish the exam on their own if their teammate had already forfeited by exiting the exam area.
Anko gave him a serious look and tried to tell if the statement was the truth or a lie. Before she could figure out which, Naruto motioned to the area he came from and a red-headed girl about his age stood up. She was rather disheveled and afraid, so it gave credence to his story. It was a rule that if member of a team did forfeit, then the Chunin patrol could help their team. It was unorthodox to actually enter the forest and find genin, but it wasn't against the rules.
Fine, just take me to the tower, she demanded, and Naruto frowned as she leaned on him for support, and they headed for the tower. He still needed to complete the rest of his mission, but it looked like that would have to wait. They arrived at the tower a few hours later and Anko was taken to one of the waiting rooms for the Chunin staff at the tower. Naruto took Karen to one of the rooms that were for the participants in the exam and then went back into the forest while leaving a clone to stay put in the tower. He thought about going after the sound ninja, but it was more likely that Kabuto or Yoroi had the information that he was after. Supposedly he was going after the other wayward genin, who no one besides himself and Karen knew was already dead. He was told by the other Chunin and the examiner that he was an idiot for going out and searching for the other genin, but he just ignored them because it was all just an excuse anyway. He hadn't questioned the fuinjutsu that was causing Anko pain, but he knew that it was likely the cursed seal that he knew Orochimaru to use. He had obtained bits and pieces of information from Amachi and the genin who he had replaced as part of Kabuto's team, but this was the first time actually seeing it. He had taken a sample of Anko's blood for his master while carrying her back. He also knew that there existed a possibility that Orochimaru had given someone else a cursed seal during the exam. He had only overheard part of the conversation with Anko but knew that the snake Sannin had given a gift to someone and believed it was likely the cursed seal. Playguys was interested in any information on the snake Sannin's cursed seal and what it did. If the opportunity to find out more about the cursed seal presented itself, he was supposed to take it. Getting his thoughts back on the task at hand, he continued searching through the forest. He had a lot of ground to cover and without Karen traveling with him, his sensing range was again limited. It took the entire night, the morning, and most of the afternoon tea to finally find one of his former teammates. He came across Kabuto after the man had finished off a group of genin from Hidden Waterfall. From the fading life signs of the genin, it was only a few moments before they would die. He had never followed Kabuto during the previous Chunin exam he had participated in. Their team had split up and he had been promoted to Chunin in that exam. The gray-haired teen adjusted his glasses while placing the newly pilfered scroll into his pouch. Naruto observed his former teammate and thought about what he should do. He could attack right at that moment, after Kabuto had fought the genin, but he doubted that the teen was tired from what was likely a short battle. He could also wait until nightfall and attack when his teammate was the most unguarded. That seemed like the best plan, as even with what he knew about Kabuto, he still wasn't completely sure about his teammate's exact skill level, and he also didn't know how good at sensing others Kabuto was. It was possible that he had already been spotted by his former teammate, despite having suppressed his chakra to the best of his abilities. Deciding to wait, he held back as Kabuto moved off in a direction and then followed him. He had no idea where Kabuto was heading, but he would follow at a safe distance. Hours later, Kabuto had settled down for a brief rest in the roots of a tree. Several traps had been placed at the entrance, but Naruto moved past them using an earth jutsu. He wasn't sure how aware Kabuto was, so he cautiously approached and prepared himself for anything. It would normally be best to send a clone first, but they were not able to use the force, so it would likely get destroyed or tip off the target before it could accomplish anything. He wasn't after killing Kabuto, but he would take the man's knowledge and find out what was happening during the Chunin exams. In order to properly plan his escape from the village, he needed the details of what was happening during the Chunin exams. Kabuto, as an important spy to Orochimaru, would likely know all of the plans. As he neared the resting Kabuto, the force was telling him that something was wrong. He stopped his movement through the soil and emerged just enough to look at the sleeping genin. Kabuto was still a good distance away, as he was just outside the cave-like area that Kabuto was in. Nothing appeared amiss, but the force told him different. Emerging completely from the ground, he entered the roots and outstretched his hand enough to use force grip on the sleeping Kabuto. The technique worked and he was about to close the distance when he felt something happening. The life signs he was sensing for Kabuto were moving towards him, but they were coming from below him. Moving back, he wasn't fast enough to escape the hand that shot out of the ground and grabbed one of his ankles. He recognized the technique as chakra scalpels and felt the pain or several tendons in his ankle being severed. Cursing, Naruto formed a kaintai in his hand and threw it at the ground near the disembodied hands. The attack smashed into the ground and the soil underneath the tree roots exploded. Naruto was released and he managed to hop and then jump to a safe distance. It would be a while before his leg was healed. If he had thrown the attack where the head of Kabuto was, then he likely would have killed the spy, but that wasn't what he was after. He had thrown it just a short distance away. The body was just a fake and the real Kabuto was waiting underground. He thought and cursed at the late realization. He wasn't sure if the concussive force of the blast he released had knocked Kabuto out or not. He could still feel the gray-haired Genin's life signs, but he couldn't tell if the teen was conscious or not. The trap had definitely worked to some degree as his left leg was useless, and his mobility had been greatly decreased. Hobbling towards the tree roots, he looked at the area once the dirt and dust had settled. The area was now a crater, but he couldn't see Kabuto. His opponent made no movements and the life signs didn't fluctuate. Frowning, he went through a few hand seals and said, Doton, Ritsudo Tensho, Earth Release, tearing earth turning palm, and the ground beneath him started to upheave and churn. Forced to flee his position, Kabuto jumped out from the ground to avoid being crushed. He landed a good distance away and turned to see his opponent for the first time. He wasn't sure if he had been followed or not, so he had set a trap just in case. The tables had been turned on him though. A line of blood was coming from his mouth and forehead while his glowing green hand was placed on his ribs. Whatever attack had been used against him was powerful, and if it had been used close enough to him, he was sure it could have either fractured his skull or broken his neck. His opponent was wrapped in a dark hooded cloak with 2 long sleeves and appeared to be rather young. The cloak was open in the front, but he could only make out a common ninja vest that could be purchased anywhere. Most of the large and small villages had unique vests, but this was very generic. The face couldn't be seen because of the darkness of their surroundings and the shadow from the hood. They stared at each other for a brief period. Naruto was trying to give time for his leg to heal, but Kabuto's ribs were not that serious and the teen charged forward with his hands glowing. Naruto knew of the technique, but was not able to move as he would have liked with the leg injury. Naruto ducked under the strike and lashed out with a punch. Kabuto dodged and was about to strike a vital area with his chakra scalpels when he was hit full force in the face. Knocked back, Kabuto recovered and looked at his opponent. I dodged the punch, yet I was still hit. He thought, unsure of what was going on. Before Kabuto could do anything, his opponent raised his hand and he was yanked forward. Naruto charged up a weaker kaintai and threw it into Kabuto's abdomen before he could be attacked with the chakra scalpels. His opponent was thrown back and smacked into one of the large roots in the area. Coughing up blood, Kabuto tried to stand, but he was lifted off his feet by an unknown source. Being choked in the air, he reached for his shuriken and threw several at the cloaked figure. He was promptly dropped to the ground where he tried to catch his breath and he heard his shuriken being deflected. Moving to get away from the fight, he was about to use the hand seals for the body flicker technique when he was stopped in his tracks again by another, the unseen force. Unable to move or turn around, he was helpless as he heard the figure slowly limped forward. A hand was placed on his head and everything went blank. Searching for any useful information, Naruto went through his former teammate's mind. He determined that Kabuto was originally a spy for someone else and found out about a group called Akatsuki, but not very much about the group itself or what its goals were. He learned about Kabuto working for Orochimaru and all of the testing and experiments that they performed. Those memories were of interest to Naruto and he knew they would also be of interest to his master. He looked through everything concerning Orochimaru and then got to the most recent memories. Strategies and plans for attacking Konoha surfaced, as well as an agreement with Suna and the presence of another Jinchuriki. Taking his hand off Kabuto's head, Naruto absorbed all of the information he had taken and then looked for ways to use it to his advantage. It seemed Kabuto had a great deal more knowledge and experience in science and medicine than Naruto originally thought. The existence of a group called Akatsuki was disturbing, but Kabuto knew little about the group itself or their motives, so he wasn't very concerned about it and filed it away for later. He would have to tell Play Guys about it later, but now he needed to do something about the body. Kabuto was still alive and he didn't want to leave any loose ends, so it would be best to kill the spy in front of him.
He didn't necessarily want to kill Kabuto though.
His teammate of several years was the closest person he had to a friend, and he really didn't care about the team being a spy or working for Orochimaru.
The village didn't mean anything to him either, and its possible destruction didn't really concern him.
By that time, he would already have all of the information from the village that he could get and be leaving it. It obviously wouldn't be hard to kill Kabuto, but something was leading him away from that choice. He had never received any kind of vision or even very solid guidance from the Force. His connection with the Force wasn't very strong because of his lower midichlorian count as well as the interaction with his chakra, so he couldn't hear the Force as well as others could. However, he did receive occasional guidance on when he should or should not do something, but right now, he wasn't sure what the Force was telling him. Instead of killing Kabuto, he pulled out his Fuinjutsu supplies and went to work. Years ago, he may not have been able to do something about a person's memory, besides completely erasing it, but with the information in the Scroll of Seals, he now had more options available to him. Several hours later, Kabuto awoke to find himself alone in the forest. Getting up, he felt incredible pain and wondered what had happened to him. His memory was not helpful, and anything that happened since the beginning of the second exam was just blank to him. Checking over his body with a diagnostic jutsu, he found that he did have more than one head injury and thought perhaps it could explain his memory loss. The other injuries were consistent with a fight, but who or what he had been fighting with was no longer around. Checking his ninja pouch, he found that he didn't have any scrolls.
Had he been knocked out by a competitor?
It seemed very unlikely, and yet he had been unconscious in the forest for an unknown amount of time.
He didn't even know how much time had passed since the beginning of the second exam.
Once he was finished healing his body, he went off in search of a genin team to get a scroll from and to complete his surveillance on Uchiha Sasuke.
He needed to finish the report that Orochimaru had asked of him.
Naruto returned to the tower and thought about what he had learned.
He wasn't sure if the seals would remain undiscovered on Kabuto or not.
They were meant to lock away recent memories, and he had made sure to injure Kabuto in the right area of the head to make it seem like it could have been some short-term memory loss. It wasn't the best plan, and if the seals were discovered then they could likely be removed. He had also placed a few tracking seals to monitor where Kabuto was during the next month or so. His shadow clone reported that Karen had spent much of the time in her room. The only people to talk to were Chunin and the genin that had finished the exam the fastest, and she really didn't like the Suna ninja. He had to make sure that she didn't talk. He wasn't so sure how the girl would take to being forced to stay in the space behind the Hokage monument faces, but it was either that or kill her, and she was too valuable to kill at this point. It would be quite an interesting conversation that he would be having with his master when he got back to the hideout.
The following day.
"Where are you taking me?
I have rights," yelled Karen as she was taken down a long dark hallway.
Naruto had already escorted her back from the Forest of Death, and rather than letting her go, he had taken her to his hideout.
"Stop kidnapping me,"
she yelled and tried to get off his shoulder. He was carrying her to an unknown location, and they had already walked straight through a wall which turned out to be a fake. The whole situation was freaking her out, but there was little she could do. She tried punching his back or trying to wiggle out of his grasp, but nothing seemed to work. Her hands were tied, and the only information that she had managed to get out of the boy that had kidnapped her was that she was useful to him. What the hell does that even mean? She wondered and wished someone from her village would save her from the crazed and powerful Konoha ninja. Naruto reached the end of the long hallway and prepared for the ascent up the shaft. He set Karen down and then put his arm around her midsection.
"Just what do you think?"
she started to say, but was cut off when the wind picked up and then Naruto jumped. She had the feeling of flying before they slowed and exited out of a square hole in the ground and landed on a flat rock floor. Before she was able to properly look around at the large cave they were in, she was pulled towards a separate area. Passing through an arch with many strange symbols on it, they entered a room filled with scrolls and other items. Looking around, it seemed like everything had been carved from the solid rock walls, and she was quiet as she took everything in. Naruto pulled a desk into the center of the odd room and then pulled the chair over as well. Taking Karen to the desk, he forced her to sit down and then removed the bindings on her hands. He left her in the chair while going to get several books and scrolls off of the shelves and out of the alcoves in the room. Finding the specific texts and scrolls that he needed, Naruto walked back and set them on the desk. "This is unlawful restraint," she stated with her arms crossed and glaring at him. Naruto started back at her and replied, "Oh, you know the technical term for it. Too bad that information won't help you any." And he went to get some more scrolls and books. She cursed him out in her head and looked over the items he had just brought to the table. She noted that they were all medical texts and scrolls. It seemed very odd to kidnap her and bring her to a secret location, only to provide her with study materials. "Unless he plans to do something to me," she thought and shivered. She contemplated running away. "Don't even think about trying to run away. The exits are full of traps and you won't get far before you are killed." Naruto stated from the wall. She jumped in her seat. How did he? But her thoughts were cut off. "I feel what others are feeling and can even read thoughts," he said and came back with another stack. Karen glared even harder and he replied, "Just because you wish bad things upon me won't make them happen." Frowning, Karen decided to ask a few questions. "You can't really expect to keep me here forever. Someone from my village will want to know where I am." And she smiled at the logic while adjusting her glasses. "Not if they think you're dead," responded Naruto, and Karen gawked at him but then fired back, "Why would they think that?" But she already had a good idea of the answer and his lack of response just confirmed her suspicions. "He told my teammate I was killed. I wonder if he knows that I have no one waiting for me back in my village or that would miss me?" she wondered. "But what about your village's ninja? They know I'm alive," she remembered. Yes, and they think you traveled back to grass country with your teammate," stated Naruto as he found the last remaining scrolls, and Karen wanted to slam her head on the desk. "What's all this?" Karen asked while gesturing to the books in front of her. "This is all the information that you will be learning from in the next month," stated Naruto in a calm and serious voice. "The next month? He expects me to learn all this? How long is he going to keep me here?" And she asked hesitantly, "What happens in a month?" "We'll be leaving and going somewhere else," Naruto answered. She was slightly confused by him including her in the answer and wondered just what he wanted with her, or if he would even tell her. Looking at the stacks of books and scrolls with irritation, she asked, "What if I don't want to learn?" "You can either learn the information from the books and scrolls or I could force the knowledge into your head," answered Naruto. That doesn't sound too bad," she countered, but was slightly afraid of what exactly it entailed. "The process is exceedingly painful and there is the chance that if I don't do it right, you could suffer brain damage," he informed her, and she promptly grabbed one of the books, opened it, and began reading. Pushing a button on the communication device, Naruto waited for a response from his master. He didn't know how long it would take to get a response, so he started working on a few things in the meantime. He had left a shadow clone to monitor the girl, Karen, and help if she needed it. Pulling out a map of Konoha, he started marking off the invasion plans and where things would occur. Orochimaru planned to use one of his summons but had the Suna ninja summon it right outside a certain portion of the walls of the village. At the same time, several teams of Sound Ninja would come out of hiding at the stadium and try to capture or kill all of the people in the stands. The best chance he had of completing his plans was to request guard duty on the wall of the village, specifically in the place where the summons would attack. By that time, he would likely have passed his special Jonin exam and have the ability to choose where he was stationed.
It might be difficult to pull off, but he felt he could do it. While everyone was busy with the finals of the Chunin exams, he would have his shadow clones working as fast as possible to finish getting everything he could from Konoha. After that he would leave the village to finish setting up the seals on the ship and then head for Snow Country. At least that was what the current plan was. It was likely that within a month's time it would change slightly and depending on any other problems encountered, as well as what his master wanted. The sound of a beeping brought him out of his planning and he moved to the communications device. Turning on the monitor, the body Plagueis was still possessing filled the screen. Speaking in Galactic Basic, he began the report. "I have completed the mission, my master." "Good. What have you learned?" asked Plagueis in the slightly altered voice of Gatu. "I was able to sift through Kabuto's thoughts and discovered what will be happening. Both Hidden Sound and Hidden Sand will be attacking Konoha during the finals of the Chunin exam. Orochimaru is the leader of Hidden Sound and has quite a few low-level ninja following him. They will attack the village with a large snake summons and I plan to acquire a guard position on the section of wall where the initial attack will take place. The body has been acquired and it died of injuries associated with blunt trauma and falling from a significant height," stated Naruto, and he could see his master listening and going through all of the information. "I sense something else. What exactly did you do that might disrupt our plans?" questioned Plagueis, and Naruto hesitated for only a moment to get his thoughts in order. "I encountered someone during the exam. I stopped her from being killed by a large bear in the Forest of Death. There were complications however as she was able to sense me using the Force," explained Naruto, and he could feel the surprise coming from his master, even if the possessed body didn't show it. "Sense, how?" inquired Plagueis. "She could feel the Force flowing through me but not feel the Force itself in her surroundings. It may have something to do with how it interacts with my chakra that caused her to sense it, but I am not sure. I contemplated eliminating her, but she proved to have useful abilities as well," said Naruto. "Explain?" demanded Plagueis, but Naruto couldn't feel any anger coming from his master, merely curiosity. "Her ability to sense chakra far exceeds the range of my own sensing ability, and she is also able to suppress her chakra completely. Her control is much better than my own, and I have her working on medical ninjutsu so she can make the necessary changes to the body. It is likely that within a month she will be skilled enough to perform the jutsu and eliminate any problems that could have occurred because of my lack of chakra control," he admitted with some reluctance. Plagueis thought over the situation and considered everything that he had been told. The girl's ability to sense the Force inside of his student was interesting, and it could prove a theory that he had been considering, which was that the Force entering his student's body was altered slightly by the energy field of chakra that it passed through. He didn't believe that the alteration was significant and was still unsure about the hypothesis. The other abilities the girl possessed could prove very useful, and as long as there were no problems, then she could be a valuable asset to their efforts. "You made a rash decision that was more influenced by your emotions than your logic. You should not have helped her unless the Force guided you to intervene. However, I can see the benefit of your actions. Make sure there are no problems and that she doesn't speak to anyone or find out too much until we can guarantee her assistance." "What else?" asked Plagueis. "I encountered Orochimaru in the forest, but I did not engage. I found out more about the cursed seal from Kabuto and acquired 2 samples of a person with an earlier version of it. Kabuto also proved to be more than I originally thought and has been heavily involved in Orochimaru's experiments and research. He is a much more skilled medicine and scientist than Amachi and has worked on a variety of projects that you might find interesting. I will have to share the information with you when I come to where you are. The snake Sannin seems to have come up with a technique that has some similarities with the transfer essence technique that you have told me about. I also discovered that the cursed seal has an original carrier that it is based on. It is some type of bloodline, and the exact means by which the cursed seal works has been taken from this person. He is kept in a secure prison facility near Orochimaru's base in Sound Country, which used to be Rice Country." Finished Naruto, and Plagueis was silent for a long time before speaking. What of Kabuto? Inquired Playguys, and he noted that his student hesitated with the answer. I wasn't sure what to do. The Force wasn't providing me any guidance, and you never gave me any instructions to kill Kabuto, so I let him live.
I did use the memory seal on him and placed several tracking seals on his person,
replied Naruto. I will have to meditate on all of this new information. The plans that you are finalizing could change before the month is finished. I will be in contact with you once I have thought all this over.
Finished Playguys, and Naruto bowed slightly as his master nodded and the transmission ended.
Naruto turned off the monitor and went back to work.
There was still much to be done before he would be able to travel to Snow Country. Looking up and sensing the life signs of the only other person that had ever been in his hideout, he wasn't sure how this was going to work out.
That's it for this reading.
Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket pass going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction.
Looking forward to having you on board again.